Clara Whitaker did not cry when they threw her off the wagon. She pressed her bleeding palm flat against the burning road, lifted her chin, and refused to give them the satisfaction of watching her break. Behind her, the church bells rang, as if celebrating her ruin. Ahead, there was nothing but heat dust and silence. She had told the truth, and the truth had cost her everything. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The wagon wheel had barely stopped rolling when Deacon Hollis reached across Clara Whitaker and took the satchel from her lap. She did not let go. Not at first. "That belongs to me," she said. Her voice was steady. She had promised herself it would stay that way. "It belongs to the church now, Miss Whitaker." Hollis did not look at her. He never looked directly at women he had already decided were beneath him. "Along with any claim you thought you had to this community." The other passengers on the wagon said nothing. Clara had known most of them for 3 years. She had taught their children to read. She had helped Mrs. Farrow address her late husband's letters when grief made the older woman's hands shake too badly to hold a pen. She had organized the harvest supper 2 years running and stayed until midnight cleaning up. Not one of them spoke. "Get down, Miss Whitaker." Hollis finally looked at her. His expression was not cruel. That was the worst part. It was certain. He had already completed the moral calculation and found it tidy. "Or I will have you removed." Clara stepped down from the wagon herself. She was not going to give anyone the pleasure of dragging her. The road was pale with summer dust, baking under a Colorado sun that had no mercy in it. She stood at the edge of the mountain pass with her torn satchel, the one Hollis had grudgingly returned after finding nothing incriminating, inside a half-empty canteen of water, already warm enough to make her stomach turn, and the clothes on her back. The wagon rolled on without a backward glance. Clara watched it go. She watched until the dust swallowed the wheels, then the canvas top, then the last muffled creak of the axle. Then she turned and faced the road ahead and tried to think clearly about what came next. What came next was approximately 40 miles of mountain wilderness between her and the nearest town that didn't already know her name. She started walking. The story of how Clara Whitaker ended up on that road began 8 days earlier in the back office of the First Meridian Bank of Holt County. She had not been snooping. That was the thing she kept returning to, as if it mattered now, as if intention still counted for something. She had gone to Everett's office to return a ledger she had borrowed to cross-check the church's donation records, a task she had volunteered for, because she was meticulous and trustworthy, and believed that good works required good accounting. She had found the office empty and the ledger she needed sitting open on Everett's desk. She should have taken it and left. Instead, she had glanced at the open page. Then she had looked again. Then she had sat down slowly in Everett's chair and read every line on every page she could find in the next 20 minutes, because what she was reading did not make sense at first, and then it made a horrible, specific, clarifying kind of sense that made her hands go cold despite the July heat. Everett Hale, her fiancé of 14 months, the most respected man in Holt County, the chairman of the church building committee, and the treasurer of the Merchant Association, and the man who had proposed to Clara on her front porch on a soft April evening with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, had been systematically transferring land deed ownership from 14 struggling families to a holding company he controlled. He had been doing it for at least 3 years. He had done it by forging signatures. Several of those signatures were Clara's. She was sitting there with the ledger still open in her hands when Everett walked back in. He looked at her. He looked at the ledger. Something moved behind his eyes that Clara had never seen there before, and in that moment, she understood that she had never actually known this man at all. The person she had believed she was going to marry did not exist. The man standing in the doorway was a careful, practiced stranger who had been wearing a reliable face for a very long time. "Clara," he said, pleasantly. "What are you doing in here? Whose signatures are these?" she asked. Her voice did not shake. It surprised her. "That's a complicated set of financial instruments," Everett said. I wouldn't expect you to. Everett. She held up the page. This is my name. I did not sign this document. I have never seen this document. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room, took the ledger from her hands with a calm, deliberate grip, and closed it. You're tired, he said. You've been working too hard on the church accounts. It's made you anxious. I am not anxious, Clara said. I am looking at forged signatures on fraudulent land transfers, and one of those signatures is mine. I want to understand how that happened. Everett set the ledger on the desk and looked at her with something that might have been, if she were generous, a species of regret. Clara, he said quietly, I think you should go home and rest. We can discuss anything you're confused about after you've had some sleep. She stood up. I'm going to the circuit judge, she said. She made it to the door. She did not make it much further than that. Everett moved faster than she would have expected from a man who spent his days behind a desk. He caught her arm just outside the office in the bank's main hall, and his grip was not rough, but it was absolute. Let go of me, Clara said. I'm trying to help you. His voice was still pleasant. That pleasantness was beginning to terrify her. You've made a mistake, Clara. You've misread something complicated and jumped to a conclusion that could cause a great deal of unnecessary harm. If you go to the judge right now in this state, you're going to embarrass yourself. What state? Clara looked down at his hand on her arm. Release me, Everett. You're agitated. You're not thinking clearly. He leaned closer. And I should mention those documents you're so concerned about. They have your signature on them. If there is an investigation, it will be your name attached to those transactions. Your name, not mine. She went still. He let go of her arm, smoothed his jacket, smiled. Go home, Clara. Rest. Come back when you're feeling more like yourself. She walked out of the bank. She walked home. She sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours, thinking very carefully. Then she went to find Reverend Marsh. That was her second mistake, though she didn't know it yet. Reverend Marsh listened to everything she said. He nodded in the right places. He asked careful, attentive questions. He offered her tea and scripture and told her that the truth would always reveal itself in the fullness of God's time. Then he went directly to Everett Hale. Within 24 hours, the story moving through Holt County was not about forged deeds or stolen land. It was about Clara Whitaker, the schoolteacher who had gone through her fiancé's private financial records without permission, misunderstood complex banking instruments she wasn't educated enough to interpret, and was now spreading dangerous accusations against a respected man because, and this was the part that spread fastest, the way ugly things always did, because he had recently expressed doubts about their engagement. A woman scorned. That was the shape the story took by sundown. By the end of the week, the Church Ladies' Committee had voted to remove Clara from her bookkeeping duties. By the following Tuesday, the school board had accepted her resignation, which she had not offered. By Thursday, Deacon Hollis had come to her door with 2 other men to inform her that the church had determined she had misappropriated donation funds, an accusation so perfectly constructed that she nearly admired the architecture of it, and that she was to leave Holt County on the next available transport. She had tried to find the ledger. It was gone. She had tried to speak to the families whose deeds had been transferred. 3 refused to open their doors. 2 listened and then went pale and closed their curtains. One old Reuben Mercer, who had lost his grazing rights the previous spring and taken it as bad luck, sat with her at his kitchen table and said quietly, Miss Whitaker, I believe every word you're telling me, and I can't help you. I got 2 daughters, and I got nothing left to lose my name over. She had tried to find the circuit judge. He was in Denison Falls, 6 days' ride north. His deputy was in Everett Hale's pocket, a fact she could not prove, and everyone seemed to know. She had run out of options by the time Deacon Hollis came back with a wagon. She got on it. She was not going to give them the satisfaction of being dragged. Mien. The road climbed through pine shadow and then broke out onto open ridge where the full weight of the summer sun hit like something physical. Clara walked steadily, rationing the water, watching the landscape, for any sign of a homestead or a creek. She was angry. She had decided anger was more useful than despair, at least for the moment, and she intended to use it for as long as it would carry her. She went over the documents in her memory. She had read them carefully, and she had a good memory. Her students had always said she could recall a line from a book she'd read once 3 years ago, and it was true. She could see the pages when she closed her eyes. She knew the names. She knew the dates. She knew which families had lost which parcels. She knew the holding company's name, Red Mesa Land Trust. She knew her own handwriting. And she knew what her signature looked like, and she knew the forgery had been nearly perfect, but not quite. There was a slight lift in the capital C that her hand never made. She had noticed it the moment she saw the page. She had no proof, no ledger, no witnesses willing to stand up, no judge within reach. But she remembered. That was something. She held on to it. She was holding on to it when she heard the horses. They came from behind, following the road up from the valley, moving at a pace that was not leisurely. 3 riders. She did not look back. Immediately she kept her stride, kept her breathing even, told herself it was travelers, told herself it was nothing, told herself there was no reason Everett Hale would send anyone after a woman he had already successfully exiled. Then, the first rider pulled alongside her, and she heard his voice, and understood that Everett Hale was in fact a thorough man. Miss Whitaker. The rider's name was Cord. She recognized him. He worked at the livery, or had claimed to, though she now doubted any simple accounting of who anyone in Holt County actually worked for. Mr. Hale asks that you return the items you took from his office before your departure. I took nothing from his office, Clara said. She kept walking. He seems to think otherwise. He seems to think a great many things that aren't true. She did not look up. I have nothing that belongs to him. You can tell him I said so. Cord's horse moved closer, close enough that she had to turn toward the cliff edge or be walked into. Ma'am, he said with a patience that had nothing friendly in it, we'd prefer to handle this without difficulty. But Mr. Hale was very clear. I'm sure he was, Clara said. He's a very clear man, about certain things. The satchel, Cord said. Look through it, she said. She held it out without stopping. There is nothing in there that belongs to Everett Hale. There is a hairbrush, half a candle, 4 letters from my sister in Ohio, and a book of poetry. You are welcome to all of it. Cord took the satchel, rifled through it, and threw it back at her feet. She had to stop to pick it up. She had not hidden the documents there. She wasn't foolish enough for that, though she didn't have them anyway, because she had nothing except her memory. But she could see from his expression that their absence only made him more suspicious, not less. You told people things, Cord said. In town, before you left. I told the truth, Clara said. Mr. Hale would like for those things to stop being said. Clara looked at him directly for the first time. Then Mr. Hale should have behaved differently. That's generally how truth works. It follows the behavior. Cord looked at the other 2 riders. Something passed between them that Clara did not like. We'd prefer to settle this peaceably, he said. So would I, Clara said. Leave me alone, and we'll have all the peace in the world. She started walking again. The 3rd rider moved his horse to block the road ahead of her. Clara stopped. She assessed the situation with the rapid, clarifying calm of someone who has already lost everything and has therefore already done most of their grieving. 3 men on horses. No witnesses. A cliff to her left and a ridge dropping steeply to her right. The sun overhead with nothing kind in it. She was calculating whether the ridge drop was survivable when the shadow fell across the road from above. She didn't hear him come. That was the first thing that struck her later when she had time to think about it. 3 horses and 3 riders, and they hadn't heard him either, because all 3 men went rigid at the same moment, which told her the arrival had surprised them as much as it had surprised her. She looked up. The man was standing on a granite outcrop above the road, perhaps 20 feet up, and he was very still. He had a rifle in his hands, not raised, not aimed, simply held the way a man holds a tool he knows well enough not to need to think about. He was broad across the shoulders and long in the leg, and he wore no hat brim that threw his face into shadow so she could see him clearly in the afternoon light. Dark hair. A jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same stone he was standing on. Eyes that were doing a rapid and thorough inventory of the situation below without any apparent emotional reaction to what they found. He looked at the three riders. He looked at Clara. He looked at the riders again. "Afternoon," he said. His voice was unhurried, low, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry. "This is private business," Cord said. His horse had shifted sideways. Cord was working to keep it still. "Road's not private," the man said. "We're having a conversation with the lady." "That what this is?" It wasn't a question. He said it the way you'd note the weather. Looked different from up here. Cord straightened in the saddle. "You know who I work for?" "I know who you're riding with," the man said. "Recognized two of them. That one on the gray worked for the Carver outfit before they pulled out last spring." He paused. Carver outfit wasn't known for having conversations. Silence on the road. The horses moved restlessly. Clara stood very still. "Last I checked," Cord said, working to recover authority, he had already lost. Silas Boone doesn't involve himself in other people's business. The name hit the three riders differently than it hit Clara. She heard it without context. They heard it with all of it clearly, because the horse on her left took 3 sideways steps without being asked, and the rider on the gray went about 2 shades lighter. The man on the rock, Silas Boone, came down from the outcrop in 3 unhurried steps, crossing ground that should have been treacherous without looking at his feet, and stopped at the edge of the road. "That used to be true," he said. He looked at Clara for a moment, brief and assessing. Then he looked back at Cord. "Got a reason to reconsider." "She's wanted for theft," Cord said. The confidence in his voice had become something performative. "She stole from the church. We're returning her for questioning." Silas looked at Clara. "That true?" he asked. "No," Clara said. He nodded once as if that settled it. "You heard her," he said to Cord. "One woman's word. She said no." His voice hadn't changed in volume or tone. It didn't need to. Man who'd push past a woman's word when she says no generally keeps pushing past other things too. He looked at all 3 of them in turn. "You boys want to have that conversation? I'm available." Nobody moved. Clara was fairly certain nobody was breathing. Cord gathered himself. "You don't know what you're getting into, Boone." "Usually don't," Silas agreed. "Doesn't seem to slow things down much." He took 1 step forward, just one. "You're done here. Ride on back down and tell whoever sent you that the lady's not available for questioning. She'll be at my ranch on the high ridge until she decides otherwise." "Hale won't." "Hale." He said the name flatly. "Tell Everett Hale that if he sends hired men up this road again, I will come down the mountain myself, and I won't be having a conversation when I do." He paused. "Tell him Silas Boone said so. He'll know what it means." Another silence. Then Cord wheeled his horse, and the other 2 followed without a word exchanged between them, which told Clara everything about what the name meant to men who knew it. She watched them go. When the dust had settled enough to breathe through, she turned and looked at the man who had just inserted himself between her and 3 armed riders without raising his rifle or his voice or, apparently, his heart rate. Silas Boone looked back at her. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Then, because she believed in accuracy, even when her legs were uncertain beneath her, mostly, he looked at her sleeve. There was dried blood there from where the road had caught her palm when she'd stumbled getting off the wagon, a small injury, minor but visible. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, just slightly. "Got water up at the ranch," he said, "and shade. You look like you've been out in this sun a while." "Since morning," Clara admitted. He nodded. He looked up the road, then back at her with the same practical assessment he'd given everything else. "You're Clara Whitaker," he said. Not a question. She went still. "How do you know my name?" "Holt County's a small place," he said. Word travels up, same as smoke. He picked up the satchel she'd dropped when she spun around, held it out to her. I know what they're saying about you. She took the satchel. Then you know they're saying I'm a thief. I know that's what they're saying, he agreed. She studied him. But you came down off that rock anyway. He said it simply, no drama in it. Woman standing in a road with 3 men closing around her and blood on her sleeve? That's what I see. Rest of it gets sorted out later. He looked up at the ridge above them, judging the light. We should move before dark. Trail up is easier if you've got the sun. Clara stood there for a moment in the middle of that burning mountain road, looking at this man who the whole county feared, who had just stood down 3 armed riders by saying her name was enough reason to, who was now offering her water and shade, as though none of the rest of it had been particularly remarkable. I don't have any money, she said. I can't pay you for your trouble. Didn't ask you to, he said. I don't know you. No, he agreed. The town will say... She stopped. The town was already saying everything it was going to say about her. There was nothing left to protect. Silas looked at her with those level, unhurried eyes. Miss Whitaker, he said quietly, if they wanted you gone this badly, you must be carrying the truth. He tilted his head toward the trail above. Whenever you're ready. Clara took one breath, then another. Then she followed him up the mountain. The trail was steep and narrow, and he took it at a pace that wasn't slow but never outstripped her. She noticed that. She noticed it the way she was noticing everything about him, because she was a practical woman in a dangerous situation. And practical women in dangerous situations paid attention. But she noticed it specifically because every man she had known in recent memory, including Everett, had the habit of walking ahead and expecting the world to keep up. Silas Boone walked beside the situation, not in front of it. He didn't speak much on the climb. What he said was useful. Loose rock here, step left. Branch at your head, duck. Once, when she slipped on a dry patch of shale, his hand came out and steadied her elbow and released it before she had time to register the contact as anything other than practical. She was breathing hard by the time the trail leveled out onto a plateau, and she saw the ranch. It was not what she had expected, though she couldn't have said exactly what she'd expected. Something wilder, maybe. Something more consistent with the legend of the man who'd gone up a mountain and never come back to society. But the structures were solid and deliberate. A cabin built low against the rock for insulation. A barn that had been extended at some point with newer timber. A corral with 6 horses that turned their heads when Silas appeared. A garden plot, actual tended productive running along the south-facing wall. A man who grew things, Clara thought. A man who planned to stay. Silas brought her to the water barrel first. He held the ladle for her and did not look away, as if the act of drinking were something private. He just waited. Thank you, she said. Yes, ma'am. My name is Clara. He looked at her. I know. You keep calling me ma'am. It's respectful. It's also what they called me right before they put me on a wagon. She met his eyes. I'd prefer Clara if it's all the same. Something shifted at the edge of his mouth, not quite a smile, an acknowledgement of one. Clara, he said, come inside. We'll get that hand looked at. The inside of the cabin was not what legend would have made it. No animal skulls. No evidence of a man living in the red margins of civilization. It was spare everything in it existed because it served a purpose, but it was ordered. A row of books on a shelf above the fireplace, spines worn and readable. A writing table in the corner with a proper chair. Maps pinned to the wall above it, annotated in a small, precise hand. Account books stacked with their spines aligned. She stopped at the bookshelf. You read, she said. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. It came out sounding startled, which embarrassed her. Silas looked at her from across the room, where he was getting a clean cloth and a water basin. Most men do. I know, she said. They said you lived like... She stopped again. Like what? No edge in it. Just the question. Like an animal, she said quietly. Because she believed in accuracy even when it was uncomfortable. That's what they say. He set the basin down and crossed to her and took her injured hand, carefully examining the road-scraped palm with the same practical attention he gave everything. "What do you say?" he asked. Clara looked around the cabin. The books, the maps, the methodical order of a man who had built a life according to deliberate principles, not desperation. "I say the town is wrong about more than just me," she said. He cleaned her hand without looking up. His touch was careful, impersonal in the way of someone who understands that people in pain don't want to be handled, they want to be helped. "You're not wrong," he said. "How'd you end up on that road?" "I told the truth about something powerful men wanted kept quiet," Clara said. "How did you end up on that mountain?" He wrapped her hand with the clean cloth, tied it off with 2 neat knots. Then he looked up and met her eyes, and she saw something there that wasn't calculation and wasn't pity. It was recognition, the specific expression of someone who has been in exactly the place you are describing. "Same reason," he said. Clara sat back. Outside, the summer wind moved through the pines above the ranch, and the horses in the corral made the soft sounds horses make in the late afternoon when the heat is finally breaking. "Then we have something in common," she said. Silas sat back as well. He looked at her with that level gaze, and this time what she saw behind it was not the feared mountain man of Holt County stories. It was a man careful and guarded, and carrying something heavy the same way she was, who had just decided something. "Seems like," he said. The sun was sliding behind the western ridge, the cabin filled with that particular gold light that makes everything look like the last hour of something that was good before it ended. Clara sat in it and breathed, and felt for the first time in 8 days that she was not entirely alone with what she knew. It wasn't safety. Not yet. Maybe not for a long while. But it was ground to stand on. That was enough for now. Clara did not sleep well her first night on the mountain. She lay on the narrow cot Silas had made up for her in the corner of the cabin. Clean blanket, flat pillow, a candle stub left on the floor nearby in case she needed light, and she stared at the dark ceiling and listened to the sounds of a world she did not yet know. The pines moved. Something called, from far down the ridge, a nightbird or a coyote, she couldn't tell. The cabin settled in the cooling air with small deliberate sounds like a structure that knew itself well. She went over the ledger pages in her mind. The names, the dates, the parcel numbers. She repeated them in order the way she used to drill her students on multiplication tables, because she was afraid that fear, or exhaustion, or time would begin to erode the edges of what she remembered, and what she remembered was all she had. 12 families. 14 land transfers. Red Mesa Land Trust. The signature with the wrong lift on the capital C. She said it all over twice. Then she lay still and listened to the mountain breathe. Silas was asleep in the barn. He had told her this plainly before dark, offering no explanation that made it an act of chivalry or sacrifice, simply stating it as the arrangement she would have the cabin. He would be in the barn. There was a bar for the cabin door if she wanted it. She had not barred the door. She wasn't sure what that meant about the state of her judgment, or whether it meant anything at all. She was a practical woman making a practical calculation. A man who had stepped in front of 3 armed riders on her behalf and then made her a cot and cleaned her hand and shown no interest in anything beyond those 2 facts was not at present the threat she needed to worry about. The threat was 40 miles down the mountain and wore a well-pressed suit and had a voice like warm water and had been systematically stealing land from struggling families for 3 years. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, and mostly failed. She was up before dawn. Not because she heard him. She was beginning to understand that Silas Boone moved through the world at a volume most people never reached, but because she was not a woman who lay in bed after daylight started threatening the eastern sky, and some habits survive exile. She found the water bucket, the fire-starting kit, the coffee tin. She had the fire going and the coffee pot on by the time the door opened and Silas stepped inside, stopping short when he saw her standing at the stove. He looked at the coffee pot. He looked at her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." Clara set out 2 cups. "Sit down. You can tell me about your water situation." He sat. Something about the directness of the instruction seemed to settle him, as if he'd been braced for something more complicated and found the straightforwardness a relief. "What do you want to know about it?" he asked. "I want to know how far your nearest reliable source is, and how much you're rationing per day." She poured the coffee and sat across from him. "I'm not going to be a guest who uses more than her share without knowing what her share is." Silas looked at her for a moment. His expression was not one she could easily read. She was still learning the vocabulary of it, the small shifts that meant more than they appeared to, but she thought something in it was adjusting, reassessing. "Creek's a quarter-mile northeast," he said. "Runs low in August, but we're early enough in July, it's still carrying. I haul twice daily, before sunrise and at dusk." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "You don't need to ration. There's enough." "I'd like to help haul," Clara said. "You don't—" "I know I don't have to," she said. "I'm telling you I want to. I'm going to be here for some period of time that neither of us can predict, and I am not going to sit in your cabin being grateful. I'm going to be useful." She held his gaze. "That's how I'm built." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he drank his coffee. "Sunrise hauls in 10 minutes, he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I was up." The creek was cold even in July, dropping out of snowmelt up on the high peaks, and the cold of it on her hands and forearms when she filled the buckets was something close to relief. They worked in near silence, the kind of silence that had content in it, the sound of water, the shift of boots on rocky ground, the weight of the full buckets on her arms that was a good honest ache. A purpose ache. Clara had not felt purposeful in 8 days, and she had missed it the way you miss a tooth constantly and with your tongue. On the walk back, Silas said, "What did you teach?" "Reading primarily," she said. "Arithmetic, some history. Composition for the older students." "How long?" 3 years in Holt County. 4 before that in Missouri." He was quiet for a moment, managing his own buckets with an ease that made hers feel theatrical by comparison. "You like it?" he said. Not a question. "I love it," Clara said, and the saying of it in the past tense hit her somewhere she wasn't ready for. She steadied herself. There's nothing like watching a child read their first sentence on their own. The look on their face, it's like watching a door open that they didn't know was there. Silas was quiet again. Then, "My mother taught herself to read from a Bible and a feed catalog. Took her 2 years. She used to read aloud at the table so my brother and I would hear it while we ate." Clara looked at him. It was the most personal thing he had said to her, and he had said it with the same flat, factual tone he used for everything, as if it were simply information. "She sounds remarkable," Clara said. "She was practical," Silas said. Which, she was beginning to understand, was the highest compliment in his vocabulary. By the third morning, a shape to the days had emerged. Pre-dawn haul, fire, coffee. He went to the horses. She managed breakfast with whatever his stores offered. He came back. They ate with the efficiency of 2 people who understood that food was fuel and silence was not unfriendliness. Then the day's work, which on a mountain ranch in summer was never small. Mending fences, checking the cattle pasture on the upper ridge, repairing tack, monitoring the water troughs. Clara did not wait to be assigned tasks. She watched what needed doing, and she did it. On the second afternoon, she found his account books stacked by the writing table and asked if she could look at them. He gave her a look that might have been surprise. "What for?" he asked. "Because I have a good eye for records, and I can see from here that your supply ledger hasn't been updated since March." She sat down at the writing table without waiting for permission. "Also because I need something to do with my mind, or I'm going to lose it thinking in circles." Silas leaned against the doorframe. "Third shelf," he said. "There's a pencil box." She opened the ledger. He went back outside. She worked for 3 hours. When she was done, she had identified 6 purchase entries that hadn't been posted, 2 pricing discrepancies on the grain account, and 1 supplier charge that appeared twice for the same delivery. She wrote it all out cleanly on a separate page, amounts and corrections, and the likely source of each error, the way she would have prepared a church accounting report. Then she noticed something at the bottom of the June supply page. It stopped her cold. She sat very still for a moment. "Silas?" She raised her voice toward the open door. He appeared in under a minute, which told her he hadn't gone far. "Your grain supplier," she said. "Dunmore Brothers out of Cedar Crossing." "What about them? Are they the only broker in the territory who services this altitude?" He came inside. "Only one who'll make the climb. Most won't come above 4,000 feet with a loaded wagon." He looked at the ledger over her shoulder, not crowding her, just reading. "Why?" "Because Dunmore Brothers is a subsidiary of Red Mesa Land Trust," Clara said. "I recognize the company name from the deed ledger. It's buried in the ownership records 3 layers down, but it's there." She turned and looked up at him. "Everett Hales Holding Company has been overcharging you on grain for at least 2 years. The silence that followed was a specific kind. Not surprise exactly. More like the sound of something that had been unclear becoming definitively clear. Silas's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, but significant. She was learning to read the small movements. "How much?" he asked. She showed him the page. He looked at the numbers. He straightened up slowly. "He's been skimming from up here too," Silas said very quietly. "He's been skimming from everyone he can reach," Clara said. "The land fraud was only the part I found. This," she gestured at the ledger, "this is what's underneath it." Silas looked at the ledger for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara. "You can prove this?" he asked. "I can document it," she said. "From your records alone right here. It won't be the deed fraud, but it's a financial trail. A judge could follow it." She held his gaze. "Do you have documentation from other ranchers up here? Supply receipts? Anyone else who uses Dunmore Brothers?" Something shifted in his expression. Something that was not quite the recognition she'd seen the first night, but was close to it. "Pete Aldridge," he said. 2 ridges north. Used to compare supplier prices with me. Complained about Dunmore Brothers going on 3 years. He paused. "Thought it was just the mountain premium." "It's not," Clara said. Silas was quiet for a long moment. "You were a bookkeeper," he said. "I was a school teacher who kept books on the side because no one else in Holt County would do it carefully." She looked up at him. "Now I'm neither, but I still know what I'm looking at." He looked at her. Then he reached over, picked up the pencil from the box on the table, set it deliberately in front of her. "Keep going," he said. "Whatever else you can find." She turned back to the ledger and kept going. On the 5th day, he told her about the killing. She had not asked. She had decided she would not ask that. If the story was his to tell, it would come when he was ready, and if it never came, she would accept the outline and leave the interior to him. She was a guest in his life, even if she was beginning to feel the shape of it under her hands. They were mending the fence on the north pasture, working in the full afternoon sun, and she was thinking about the chain of subsidiary companies she'd been tracing in his records. How Everett's network reached farther than she'd initially understood when Silas stopped working and stood with his hands on the fence post and spoke. 3 years ago this August, he said. Family named Greer. Had a homestead about 6 miles south of here, lower altitude. Good water. Father, mother, 2 daughters. The Carver outfit wanted their land water rights, specifically not the land itself. Carver's men came out 4 times, telling the Greers to sell. Greer said no every time. He paused. I knew the family. Used to trade with them. Good people. Clara set down her wire and listened. 5th time Carver's men came out, they came at night, Silas said. 8 of them. I was riding back from Cedar Crossing, came through the south trail, heard the noise. By the time I got there, he stopped, looked at his hands on the post. The girls were hiding in the root cellar. Father was down. Mother was putting herself between the men and the cellar door. Clara said nothing. I had my rifle, Silas said. I warned them. I said it once clearly. I said, get off this property. He was quiet for a moment. 3 of them drew. "And you're still standing," Clara said quietly. "Three of them aren't," he said. The flatness in his voice was not coldness. She understood that now. It was the sound of a man who had carried something heavy long enough that he'd had to stop feeling the weight of it in order to keep walking. The other five ran. Carver reported it as an unprovoked attack. Said his men were on that road by coincidence. Said I came out of the dark and opened fire for no cause. And people believed him, Clara said. Carver owned the mill, the main water rights for 3 townships and 2 county commissioners. Silas looked up. The Greers left 2 months later, took the offer on the land. Can't blame them, they had 2 daughters and the men who'd come to their door were still breathing. He finally took his hands off the post. I came up the mountain, figured I'd wait it out. You've been waiting 3 years, Clara said. Word was I'd be arrested if I came back down, he said. Carver's men, the ones who ran, they had a story. Story has a warrant attached to it. He looked at her steadily. I'm not the law. I'm a man who made the only choice he could see in the dark on a night when a woman was standing between 8 armed men and her daughters. His jaw was tight. I'd make the same choice again, but that doesn't clear the warrant. Clara stood in the full sun on that mountain pasture and felt the particular fury of recognizing a pattern, the same mechanism, different faces, the same basic social machinery that protected men with money and power and destroyed anyone who inconvenienced them. Carver, she said slowly. Is he connected to Everett Hale? Silas looked at her. The look went on for a moment too long, and Clara felt the air change between them. What makes you ask that? He said. Because I've been going through your supply records for 5 days, and I've seen the name Carver in 3 different subsidiary chains. She kept her voice level. I thought it was a common name. Is it? Silas was very still. Carver's wife is Everett Hale's cousin, he said. That's always been common knowledge. It's more than common knowledge, Clara said. It's a business arrangement. She heard her own voice drop. Silas, Carver and Hale are part of the same network. The water rights Carver took from the Greers I need to see if they're in the Red Mesa holding trust. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and started back toward the cabin at a pace she had to move quickly to match. I've got records going back 6 years, he said over his shoulder. Supply receipts, trade notes, everything I've kept. If the connection is there... It's there, Clara said. I don't know the shape of it yet, but it's there. They covered the ground back to the cabin faster than they'd covered any ground between them yet. She found it in his trade correspondence in a bundle of letters he'd kept in a tin box at the back of the supply shelf. The letters were from other ranchers, mostly notes about prices and weather and cattle, but wedged between 2 feed invoices from the spring of 1877 was a single letter printed on the stationery of the Holt County Merchant Association, signed by Everett Hale, as treasurer, announcing the establishment of a new agricultural cooperative for mountain suppliers. The cooperative's founding members were listed at the bottom. The 4th name was R.B. Carver. Clara held the letter up. This is the same cooperative that owns Dunmore Brothers, she said. Silas took the letter, read it, handed it back. His jaw was doing that tight thing. They set up the supply chain to control access to goods for anyone above the valley line, Clara said, working through it as she spoke. Mountain ranchers have no other suppliers who'll make the climb, so Dunmore's is the only option. Carver uses the cooperative to consolidate water rights in the lower altitudes. Hale runs the financial layer deed transfers, land trust, the banking mechanism. She stopped. It's a system. It's not just fraud. It's a constructed system for extracting land and resources from anyone who can't afford to fight back. Silas stood in the cabin with his arms crossed and a look on his face that was not fury, because she'd noticed he didn't wear fury openly, but was the thing underneath fury, the bedrock underneath it, the thing that had made him step in front of 3 armed men at the Greer homestead without hesitation. How many people are caught in this? He said. How wide does it go? I don't know yet, Clara said. I know Holt County. I know the 14 families whose deeds transferred. But if Carver's piece runs parallel... She looked at the letter in her hand. We need to get this to the circuit judge, not the deputy in Holt County. The actual judge. Judge Alderman is in Denison Falls, Silas said. 6 days north. Then we need to send for him. We need more than a letter and a supply invoice, Silas said. Hale will say you forged them. He'll say I forged them. We need witnesses. People who can testify to the deed transfers the supply overcharging the cooperative scheme. He paused. We need people who've lost something and can prove what they lost. Clara sat down with the letter in her hands and thought. Pete Aldridge, she said. You said he's been complaining about Dunmore Brothers for 3 years. He has. And the families in the valley, the ones whose deeds transferred. 3 of them wouldn't talk to me, but Reuben Mercer did. He sat at his table and told me he believed me. He said he couldn't afford to lose his name. She looked up. What if losing his name isn't the risk anymore? What if the risk is staying quiet while the system takes everything else from him anyway? Silas looked at her. You think you can bring witnesses, he said. I think people who've been told their silence is protection will eventually figure out that their silence is just convenient for the people stealing from them. She set the letter on the table. I can be persuasive when I have something true to say. It'll mean going back toward Holt County, he said. Hale's men are looking for you. I know. It's dangerous. I know that too. She looked at him directly. What's the alternative? Stay up here and wait for Everett Hale to decide he hasn't finished yet. She shook her head. He's already overcharged you on grain for 2 years. He's already got a warrant hanging over your head through Carver. He's not done. He won't be done until there's nothing left to take. She paused. I didn't come up this mountain to hide. I came up here because I had nowhere else to go. That's different. Silas studied her for a long moment. Long enough that she started to think he was going to say no, that the caution in him, the survival instinct of a man who had spent 3 years maintaining a careful solitary safety, was going to win the calculation. Then he said, Pete Aldridge first. He's closer and I trust him. We go at first light, come back the same day. Agreed? Clara said. You don't go alone, he said. Anywhere outside this ranch you're not alone. That's not... He paused. That's not me saying you can't handle it. It's me saying Cord and his men know this territory. I understand, she said. I wasn't planning to be foolish about it. He looked at her. Didn't think you were. He picked up the letter and the supply invoice and the ledger notes she'd compiled, and he set them in the tin box and put it back on the shelf. Get some sleep, he said. I'll wake you before sunrise. See, Pete Aldridge was a wiry, sun-leathered man of 60 who had the permanent squint of someone who'd spent decades reading the sky for weather. He met them at his gate with a rifle down at his side. Standard Clara was beginning to understand for men at this altitude who'd learned that unannounced visitors covered a wide range of intentions. When he saw Silas, he lowered it. When Silas introduced Clara, Aldridge looked at her with a gaze that was appraising, but not unkind. Heard about you, he said. I imagine you have, Clara said. Heard Everett Hale wants you found. He does. Heard you stole church money. I didn't. She met his eyes. I found out he's been stealing land and running the thefts through a financial network that includes your grain supplier. I have documentation. I'd like you to look at it. Aldridge stared at her for a moment. Then he looked at Silas. She always talk like this? He asked. So far, Silas said. Aldridge opened his gate. Come in then. They spread the papers on Pete Aldridge's kitchen table, and Clara walked him through it methodically. The supply overcharging the subsidiary chain, the cooperative letter, the connection to Carver, the connection to Hale. Aldridge sat with his arms on the table and his squint deepening with every page, and Clara recognized the look on his face because she had seen it in Reuben Mercer's kitchen, that specific look of a man who'd believed something was bad luck, discovering it was something else entirely. Son of a... Aldridge stopped himself. Looked at Clara. Pardon? Don't worry about it, she said. 3 years, he said. I've been paying double on grain for 3 years thinking it was just the mountain haul cost. He sat back. I told my wife I was a fool for not shopping further south for a supplier. You weren't a fool, Clara said. You were the target of a designed scheme. There's a difference. He looked at the cooperative letter, at Everett Hale's signature. I got a brother-in-law in Denison Falls, he said slowly. Drives supply wagons for the circuit judge's office. He could get a letter to Judge Alderman directly. Clara felt something release in her chest that she hadn't known was held tight. Would he? She asked. If I ask him? Aldridge looked at Silas. You think the judge would act on this? Alderman's clean, Silas said. He's the reason I've been waiting. If we go to anyone else in that system, Hale knows before the ink dries. Alderman's different. Aldridge tapped the cooperative letter with one finger. How many other ranchers you think are caught in this supply scheme? At least a dozen above the valley line, Silas said. Anyone using Dunmore Brothers, which is anyone above 4,000 feet. Aldridge let out a long breath through his nose. I can ride to 2 of my neighbors this afternoon, he said. Men I trust. Show them this. He paused. If they'll sign a statement about the overcharging, will that help? It will help considerably, Clara said. Aldridge stood up, looked at Clara with that appraising squint. They're saying in town you're a liar and a thief, he said. I know, she said. You seem like neither one. I'm neither one. He nodded once. The conversation was apparently settled as far as he was concerned. Write out what you need, he said. I'll get it to my brother-in-law by tomorrow evening. Clara took the pencil Silas passed her, sat down at Aldridge's table, began to write. Che. They rode back in the low gold of late afternoon, moving fast on the trail, not talking much. Clara was processing, running through what they had, what they still needed, how long it would take a letter to reach Denison Falls, and how long after that before a circuit judge would move. She was turning it in her mind when Silas's horse stopped abruptly. She pulled up beside him. He was looking at the trail ahead. His hand was near the rifle but not on it. His eyes were doing that rapid inventory she'd seen that first day on the road. What is it? She said quietly. Fresh tracks, he said. Shod horses. 4 of them. Came in from the east trail, went up toward the ranch. Clara looked at the tracks she couldn't read, but he clearly could. When? She said. 2 hours, maybe less. He looked at her. Something in his eyes had gone flat and very alert. They're at the ranch right now. Clara's stomach dropped. The tin box, she said. Silas was already moving. She rode after him and did not let herself think about everything they'd built over 6 days. The ledger work, the documented connections. Aldridge's testimony promise. All of it sitting in a tin box on a shelf, while strangers walked through the cabin she'd begun without fully meaning to think of, as something close to safe. She rode hard, and kept up. They came in from below the ridgeline, moving quiet, Silas knowing the approach as well as he knew his own hands. He took her horse's reins and tied both animals to a pine and held up one finger, stay, and she almost didn't listen, because she had stopped being a woman who waited easily. But she stayed. She heard his boots on the rock, almost nothing. Then voices from inside the cabin, 2 of them not bothering to be quiet because they believed they were alone. Not here. Boone must have moved it. Check the outbuilding. Then Silas's voice, flat as a stone. Don't have to check anything. Silence. Very complete silence. Clara counted her heartbeats. Got to 7 before one of the men inside spoke again. Boone, we're not looking for trouble. Found some anyway, Silas said. Step out here where I can see your hands. Clara moved from her position. She couldn't help it. She needed to see, and came around the corner of the barn in time to watch 2 men she didn't recognize come out of the cabin with their hands visible and their faces wearing the careful expression of people reconsidering a decision. Silas was standing in the cabin doorway. He hadn't raised his rifle. He didn't need to. Who sent you? He said. The 2 men looked at each other. "We're just checking on a report," one of them said. "Property inspection." "Whose property?" Silas said. Another look between them. "Red Mesa Land Trust," the man said. "There's a question about your deed, Boone, whether it's properly registered." The words landed in the afternoon air like a stone in still water. Clara went cold. Silas was quiet for a long moment. "My deed," he said, "is registered at the Territorial Land Office in Denver. Has been for 11 years. He paused. "Who filed the question?" The men said nothing. Silas stepped forward. He didn't need to raise his voice or his rifle. The step was enough. "Who filed the question on my deed?" he said again. "Hale," the first man finally said. "Everett Hale filed a competing claim last week. Said there's a registration error." Clara pressed her back against the barn wall and felt the specific horror of recognizing that she had not fully understood how far Everett Hale was willing to go. She had thought she was the target. She had thought the mountain was shelter. She hadn't understood that by coming here, by letting Silas shelter her, by pulling Silas into the evidence she was building, she had pointed Everett's machinery directly at the man who had helped her. She had brought this up the mountain. Silas looked at the two men. His voice when he spoke was very quiet. "Get off my land," he said, "and tell Everett Hale that if he wants to contest my deed, he can bring his paperwork to Judge Alderman in Denison Falls." He paused. "Tell him I'll be there to answer it." The two men left. Fast. Silas stood in the cabin doorway and watched them go. Then he turned, and his eyes found Clara where she stood by the barn wall. She walked toward him and stopped at the cabin steps. "Silas," she said, "I'm sorry. They came after your deed because of me. Because you—" "Stop," he said. "I brought this here. If I hadn't—" "Clara." His voice was not harsh, but it was definite. "I knew what I was doing when I came down off that rock." He held her eyes. "I don't do things I don't choose to do." She looked at him. At the absolute steadiness in his face, the same steadiness she had seen on that outcrop when he had looked down at three armed men and done the arithmetic and come down anyway. "You could lose your land," she said. "Only if we let him file that claim unopposed," Silas said. "Which we won't." He stepped back inside and went directly to the supply shelf and checked the tin box. Opened it, counted the papers. "Still here," he said. "They didn't find it." Clara let out a breath. He turned and looked at her. "That letter needs to reach Denison Falls faster than we planned," he said. "If Hale files that deed claim, Alderman needs the fraud documentation in his hands before the claim completes." "Aldridge's brother-in-law, not fast enough." Silas set the tin box on the table. "I need to ride to Denver." The air in the cabin changed. "Denver is 6 days," Clara said. 5 pushing hard." He was already moving, going through the supply shelf with the efficiency of a man who had packed for mountain travel before. "The Territorial Land Office has my original deed filing. I can bring a certified copy back which kills the competing claim outright. And I can file a formal fraud complaint with the Territorial Marshal's office while I'm there." He paused. Territorial Marshal outranks a county deputy and can't be bought by Hale because he answers to Denver, not Holt County. Clara sat down at the writing table. "If you go to Denver," she said, working through it, "Hale will know. Cord will see you on the road." "Probably," Silas said. "He'll move faster. He'll know we're building something." "He already knows," Silas said. "Sending those men here, that wasn't a question about a deed. That was a message." He stopped and looked at her. "He's not waiting anymore, which means we can't either." Clara looked at the tin box. At the papers inside that connected Everett Hale's fraud to 11 years of deliberate theft from families who had nothing to spare. At the cooperative letter with his signature at the bottom. "I'll stay here while you ride," she said. "Aldridge knows where I am. I can keep working on the documentation, try to get statements from the other ranchers he mentioned." She paused. "And I need to write letters to the families in the valley. Reuben Mercer and the others. They need to know what we're building. They need to know it might actually work this time." Silas looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Something in the look had changed since that first morning at the water barrel. She could feel it without being able to name it exactly, a shift in the quality of his attention, the way it had moved from assessment to something that had no simple word attached to it. "You'll stay inside after dark," he said. "Bar the door." "Yes." "Pete Aldridge has a shotgun and the sense to use it. If anything feels wrong, you ride to him. Not toward town. North." "Understood. I'll be back in 10 days, he said. 11 at the outside." Clara stood up. They stood on opposite sides of the writing table, with the tin box between them and the window showing the first purple edge of evening coming in over the ridge. "Be careful," she said. He picked up his hat from the peg by the door and settled it on his head. He looked at her with those level, steady eyes that she had learned to read better than she'd expected to in 6 short days. "Always am," he said. He was gone before full dark. Clara stood in the cabin alone and listened to the mountains settle around her, and felt the specific weight of knowing that what had begun as shelter had become something else. Not safety, exactly. Not yet, possibly not for a long time. But a direction. A shared direction pointed at the same truth held by two people who had both been destroyed by lies and had both separately and now together refused to stay destroyed. She sat down at the writing table. She opened the ledger. She picked up the pencil. She had work to do. Clara had 11 days. She used every one of them. The morning after Silas rode for Denver, she was at the writing table before the sky had finished deciding what color it wanted to be. She had the ledger open, the tin box beside her, and a fresh sheet of paper on top of everything. She started with what she knew cold, the 14 Holt County deed transfers, the Red Mesa Land Trust chain, the Dunmore Brothers supply fraud, and she built outward from there, cross-referencing every name she'd seen in Silas's records against the cooperative letter and the supply invoices, looking for the seams where the different pieces of Everett's network connected. By mid-morning, she had 7 pages of notes in her tightest handwriting. By afternoon, she had a problem. The documentation she had was strong for the supply fraud. Clear numbers, clear, overcharging a paper trail. A judge could follow with his eyes closed. But for the deed transfers, the core crime, what she had was her memory and one cooperative letter. The actual ledger she'd seen in Everett's office, the forged signatures, the deed numbers, the Red Mesa filings, that was gone. Everett had it or had destroyed it. And a schoolteacher's memory, however precise, was not evidence a territorial court would act on alone. She needed the families. She needed Reuben Mercer. She sat with that fact for a long time, turning it in her hands, the way she'd turned problems in her classroom, from every angle, looking for the approach that was both true and useful. Then she picked up the pencil and wrote Reuben Mercer a letter. Not a plea. Not an appeal to courage or justice. A letter that laid out in plain accounting language exactly what had been taken from him, how it had been taken, where the proof was, and what the realistic outcome would be if he chose to testify and if he chose to stay silent. She wrote it the way she'd write a ledger entry, factual, complete, without flourish. She folded it and set it aside. She wrote 11 more letters. To every family she could name from the deed records. She wrote each one specifically. She used their parcel numbers, their transfer dates, the exact amounts their land had been undervalued in the Red Mesa filings. She wanted each person to understand that she was not speaking in generalities. She knew their specific story. She had seen their specific name on Everett Hale's forged pages. Then she sat back and thought about how to get them delivered without riding into Holt County herself. Pete Aldridge came by the following morning as he'd said he would. He read the first 3 letters, squinting at the page, and when he finished, he set them down and looked at Clara with an expression she was starting to recognize in men who were reassessing a prior assumption. "You write like a lawyer," he said. "I write like a teacher who read everything she could get her hands on," Clara said. "Will your brother-in-law take these to Denison Falls along with the fraud documentation?" "He'll take them," Aldridge said. "Man named Tom Briggs at the feed exchange in Denison Falls. He's connected to most of the families in the valley, does business with half of Holt County." If Briggs reads one of these letters and decides it's credible, he'll talk. And when Briggs talks, people listen. He tapped the stack. You got one in here for him? Clara pulled out the 12th letter. Aldridge read it, looked up. You know about his water rights dispute, he said. Dunmore Brothers' parent company filed a competing irrigation claim against his property in April of '77, Clara said. It's in the cooperative's filing record. He may not know the claim is connected to Hale. Aldridge set the letter down carefully, the way you set down something fragile or explosive or both. I'll get these out today, he said. Thank you, Clara said. He stood, picked up his hat, then stopped. You said Boone went to Denver, he said. Alone. Yes. And you're up here alone. Yes. He turned his hat in his hands. I got a neighbor woman, Martha Voss, widow. She's got more backbone than most men I know, and she can shoot better than any of them. I could ask her to come stay up here while Silas is gone. Clara started to say she was fine, that she didn't need looking after, that she had barred the door every night and kept Silas's second rifle loaded and close. She had the words ready. Then she thought about the two men who had walked through the cabin while she and Silas were at Aldridge's ranch. She thought about how quiet they'd been, how certain they'd been that the cabin was empty. I'd appreciate that, she said, if it's not an imposition. I'll send her this afternoon, Aldridge said. He was as good as his word. Martha Voss arrived with a horse, a shotgun, a cast-iron skillet, and an opinion about everything delivered without hesitation, and without apparent concern for whether the recipient was ready to receive it. She was 61 years old, solidly built with white hair, pinned so efficiently it looked architectural, and eyes that missed nothing. She walked into the cabin, looked around, said, "Good bones," and started reorganizing the kitchen shelf. I have a system, Clara said from the writing table. I can see that. Martha said, moving things anyway. It's the system of a woman who doesn't cook much. I've been busy. You can be busy and still put the salt where you can reach it without standing on your toes. Martha turned and looked at Clara. Really looked the way some older women did, like they were reading not just your face, but the sentence underneath it. Pete told me what you found. Did he? Clara said. He did. And I'll tell you what I told him. I lost 60 acres in the spring of '78 that I was told was a tax dispute. She paused. My late husband's family had held that land since '62. The tax notice came from a county office I'd never heard of before and haven't been able to locate since. Clara set down her pencil. What was the county office called? She said. Holt County Agricultural Compliance Bureau, Martha said. Has a letter with a seal and everything. Looked official enough that my lawyer at the time said, pay it or lose the land. Clara stared at her. That bureau does not exist, Clara said. I went through every county office record in the church files 2 years running. There is no Agricultural Compliance Bureau in Holt County. Martha Voss looked at Clara without surprise. I know that now, she said. She took the letter from her skirt pocket, worn at the fold, clearly handled many times, and set it on the table in front of Clara. I've been carrying this for 2 years, trying to figure out who to show it to. Clara picked it up, read it again. At the bottom, in small print, was an address for the Compliance Bureau. She traced it in her memory against the property map she'd studied in Silas's records. The address was the same building as the Red Mesa Land Trust office in Cedar Crossing. Her hand was very still on the paper. Martha, she said quietly. Can I keep this? That's why I brought it, Martha said, and went back to reorganizing the kitchen shelf. The days moved fast after that. Clara and Martha developed a rhythm as efficiently as Clara and Silas had, though the texture of it was different, where Silas communicated in useful silences and careful actions. Martha communicated in a constant low commentary on the world that was underneath its surface acidity, one of the most clear-eyed readings of human behavior Clara had encountered. Martha had lived 61 years in the territories, and she had watched men like Everett Hale her entire life, and she had no illusions about what they were. They find a hole in the law, Martha said one evening, sitting across from Clara at the writing table, while Clara worked through a new batch of Silas's correspondence. And they don't use it, they widen it. Year by year, case by case, they widen it, until it's not a hole anymore, it's a door. And then they walk through it like they built the place. That's exactly what this is, Clara said, not looking up. The Agricultural Compliance Bureau letter is the same method as the church fund accusation. Create a document that looks official. Attach a name people trust. Move before anyone can verify. How many people do you think got those letters? If the Compliance Bureau is connected to Red Mesa and the timing follows what I've found in the supply records. Clara stopped, did the calculation. 30 families, maybe more, over 5 years. Martha was quiet for a moment. That's a lot of people who lost a lot of land, she said. It is, Clara said. And most of them probably think it was their own fault. A tax they missed, a record they didn't file. That's how it works. The scheme is designed so the target blames themselves. How do you stop it? You make it visible, Clara said. You pull it out of the dark where it's been operating and you put it in front of a judge in full daylight with documentation and witnesses, and you make it impossible to deny. She looked up from the ledger. That's the only way. Martha nodded slowly. Silas picked the right woman to come down off that rock for, she said. Clara looked at the lamp flame and said nothing, but she felt the words land somewhere. They didn't entirely leave. 6 days after Silas left, the first rider came up from the valley. He arrived at mid-morning, moving slow enough to be non-threatening, and Clara was on the porch with Silas's rifle before he'd cleared the tree line. Martha appeared in the doorway behind her with the shotgun at a casual angle that meant business. The rider stopped at the edge of the yard and took off his hat. He was young, mid-20s maybe, with the look of someone who'd ridden hard and slept poorly and had something he needed to say before he lost his nerve. Miss Whitaker, he said. Who's asking? Clara said. My name is James Mercer. My father is Reuben Mercer. He held the hat with both hands. He got your letter 3 days ago. He sent me up here. A pause. He sent me to tell you he'll testify. Clara lowered the rifle 2 inches. Is he willing to put that in writing? She said. Yes, ma'am. The young man reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. He wrote it out himself. Everything, the deed transfer, the date, the amount, who came to the house, what they said, what paper he signed, all of it. He held out the envelope. He says to tell you, he says he's sorry he didn't do this sooner. He says he's been afraid. He paused, and his voice was younger, then more unguarded. He cried when he wrote it. I never saw my father cry before. Clara came down the porch steps and took the envelope. She held it for a moment without opening it. Tell your father, she said carefully, that he's not the one who should be sorry. James Mercer nodded. He put his hat back on. Then he said, there's something else. 2 more families from the valley, the Coopers and the Brants, they heard Pa was sending a letter. They want to send their own. He paused. There might be more. Word's been moving since your letters came through Tom Briggs. They're talking. Maybe for the first time. Clara stood in the yard with Reuben Mercer's envelope in her hands and the sun on her face, and felt something she hadn't felt since she'd walked out of Everett Hale's bank and understood her life had just been taken apart. Felt the specific sensation of something that had been falling, beginning very slowly to fall differently. Not caught yet. Not safe yet. But the direction changing. Tell anyone who wants to write, she said, to get their letters to Tom Briggs in Denison Falls. We need them there before the circuit court date. She looked at James Mercer steadily. Can you carry that message back? Yes, ma'am, he said. He rode back down the mountain. Martha appeared at her shoulder. That's one, Martha said. That's one, Clara agreed. She opened the envelope and read Reuben Mercer's statement, handwritten, halting in places achingly specific. And she thought about a man sitting at his kitchen table, trying to write down the day someone took his land. And she thought about courage and the shape it took in ordinary people who had been afraid for a very long time. "Let's get back to work," she said. The second rider came 2 days later, and he did not take his hat off. Cord, 3 men behind him. The same configuration as the road, but this time on Silas's land. And this time, Clara was not alone, and not unaware, and not without a rifle she knew how to use. She was on the porch before he reached the gate, and Martha was in the barn doorway with the shotgun visible, and the 2 positions covered the yard between them in a way that any man with tactical sense could read clearly. Cord read it clearly. He stopped his horse outside the gate. "Miss Whitaker." His voice was careful. "Mr. Hale would like to speak with you." "I have nothing to say to Mr. Hale," Clara said. "And he has nothing to say to me that I want to hear." "He's concerned about your welfare," Cord said. "Up here alone, unprotected." "I'm not alone," Clara said. "And I'm not unprotected." Cord looked at Martha, looked at the shotgun, looked back at Clara. "Mr. Hale wants to offer you an arrangement," he said. "He believes there's been a misunderstanding. He's willing to—" "There was no misunderstanding," Clara said. "I read a ledger. I understood it completely. What Mr. Hale wants is for what I read to disappear. I'm not going to let that happen." Cord shifted in the saddle. The men behind him had gone very still. "Miss Whitaker." His voice had changed. Still controlled, but the pleasantness was thinner now, wearing through. "You don't have anything. You have some supply records and an old letter and a story no court is going to take seriously from a woman with a theft charge attached to her name. Whatever you think you've built up here—" He paused. "It won't hold." "Then Mr. Hale has nothing to worry about," Clara said. "And there's no reason to ride up this mountain. He'd like to resolve this quietly. He should have thought about quiet before he forged my signature on 30 families' worth of stolen deeds." She kept her voice even and carrying. "Ride back down, Cord. Tell Everett Hale that the only conversation I'm willing to have is with a circuit judge, and that conversation is going to happen whether he sends men up here or not." Cord looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that was calculation. She could see him measuring distances, weighing options, doing the same arithmetic she was doing. Then he looked at the rifle in her hands, the shotgun in Martha's, the absolute steadiness with which they both held them. He turned his horse. "Mr. Hale isn't a patient man," he said. "Neither am I," Clara said. "Not anymore." She watched them ride back down until the dust settled. Then her hands started shaking. She let them. Nobody was watching. Martha came out of the barn and stood beside her. "Good," Martha said. "That's the first time I ever heard a Hale man back down." "They'll come back," Clara said. Her voice was steady, even if her hands weren't. "Probably," Martha said. "We'll be ready." They were both right. 3 days later, on a morning that tasted of dry lightning before the sky had shown any weather, Clara woke to the smell of smoke. Not the cabin stove. Not the controlled, purposeful smell of a morning fire. This was the other kind. She was out of bed and to the door before Martha spoke. Martha was already at the window looking east. "Ridgeline," Martha said. Her voice was quiet. Dry lightning caught the scrub oak. Clara looked east. Against the pale early sky, a line of orange was running along the ridge above them, moving with the wind, and the wind was coming down the canyon, coming toward the ranch. Clara's mind moved fast. The cattle in the upper pasture, the horses in the barn, the tin box on the shelf inside, the 11 days of documentation statements, ledger copies, the fake Agricultural Compliance Bureau letter, Martha's testimony, the supply fraud chain, everything she and Silas had built sitting in a tin box in a cabin directly in the path of a canyon fire. "Get the horses out," she said to Martha. "All of them. Drive them north." "What are you—" "I'm getting the box." Clara was already moving back inside. She grabbed her boots, shoved her feet in, grabbed the tin box from the shelf, shoved the ledger on top, and tied her satchel around both. She came back out and threw it all over the nearest horse. Then she stopped. From the south trail, the same trail Cord had used 3 days ago, she heard horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. Not the tentative pace of men who were uncertain of their welcome. These men knew exactly where they were going. Martha had heard it too. She was watching the south trail, the shotgun up. "They set the fire," Clara said. Not a question. "Dry lightning doesn't come before the thunder," Martha said grimly. "And I don't hear any thunder." 4 riders broke from the tree line, and Clara recognized 2 of them, Cord and the man from the gray horse who had been with him that first day on the road. The other 2 she didn't know, but the way they fanned out as they entered the yard told her they'd been told about the defensive positions. Cord looked at the smoke on the ridge, looked at Clara, and smiled, which was the most frightening thing she had seen him do. "Shame about the fire," he said. "These mountain canyons, once a fire gets in the draw." He let the sentence go unfinished. "What do you want?" Clara said. Her voice was flat, past anger, past fear in the register where everything gets very simple. "The box," Cord said. "And your word that you'll leave the territory. Mr. Hale is being generous. He's willing to drop the theft charge, give you travel money, let you start over somewhere that isn't here. In exchange for the documentation. In exchange for all of it. The letters, the ledger notes, whatever you've put together up here." He paused. "And your silence." Clara looked at the smoke. It was thicker now, and she could hear something that was either the fire itself or her own heartbeat. "There are signed statements from 12 families on their way to Denison Falls right now," she said. "Destroying what I have here doesn't stop that." Something crossed Cord's face, a flicker of something that was not quite certainty anymore. "He doesn't know about Denison Falls," Martha said quietly from beside her. Cord looked between them. Clara saw it, the calculation behind his eyes recalculating. He'd been sent to recover the documents. He hadn't been told about Aldridge's brother-in-law or Tom Briggs or the letters already moving north. "The box doesn't matter," Clara said. She set it down on the porch. "Take it if you want it. We kept copies." That was not entirely true. She had one duplicate set partial, but Cord didn't know what was or wasn't in the box, and she could see from his face that uncertainty was spreading. "You're bluffing," Cord said. "Then call it," Clara said. "Go back to Everett Hale and tell him you took the box and the documents that matter are already in Denison Falls, and the circuit judge has been sent for, and see what he does." She held his gaze. "Or take the box and ride, and let's all find out together how this ends in front of Judge Alderman." The smoke was thickening. Cord looked at the ridge. The 4 riders were looking at each other. From behind, Clara Martha said very calmly, "Son, that fire's going to come down this canyon in about 20 minutes, and none of us want to be in it. So you'd best decide fast." Cord reached down and grabbed the box from the porch. His jaw was tight. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," Clara agreed. "It isn't." He rode. All 4 of them backed down the south trail, taking the box that held. Clara had made sure of this before setting it down, nothing more than Silas's old supply ledger from 1875, and a stack of blank paper she'd used as filler. The real documentation was in her satchel on her horse, tied to her body. She had learned watching Everett Hale operate that the performance of the thing was often more powerful than the thing itself. Martha grabbed her arm. "Move, now! That fire's real!" "Joe!" They drove the horses north and moved the cattle as far up the safe trail as they could manage, and then they could do nothing but hold their positions and watch, because a fire in a canyon is its own decision, and no human argument will change its mind. The smoke turned the morning orange, and the heat, already brutal in a summer that had been relentless, became something with weight and intention. It burned through the scrub oak along the east ridge. It came down into the upper pasture and took the fence line and one corner of the hay storage. It threatened the barn for 20 minutes that Clara spent in a state of focused, deliberate calm that she did not entirely feel, but could entirely perform, because performing calm when there is nothing useful to do is one of the more important skills a person can develop. It did not take the barn. It did not take the cabin. The wind shifted just enough at just the right moment, and the fire moved southeast instead of down into the main yard. When the smoke thinned enough to see through, Clara let out the breath she had been managing for an hour. Martha was covered in ash and sweat and looked entirely untroubled by this. "Cabin's fine," Martha said. "Barn's fine. You're fine." She looked at Clara. "Now, what exactly is in that satchel?" "Everything," Clara said. "Everything that matters. I switched it before I put the box on the porch." Martha studied her. "Silas Boone came down off a rock for the right woman," she said. "I'll say that much." Clara looked at the cabin, the barn, the damaged fence line, the horses moving nervously at the north trail's edge. She thought about the tin box in Cord's hands riding south full of 1875 supply ledgers and blank pages. She thought about the letters already moving toward Denison Falls. She thought about Reuben Mercer's statement in her satchel, his cramped handwriting, the sentence that began with, "I want to say what was done to my family." She was going to keep every one of those words safe. She was going to deliver them to a judge who could act on them, and she was going to stand in a room with Everett Hale and make sure he heard them read aloud. She had decided this, she realized, somewhere in the middle of the fire. Somewhere between watching the smoke roll down the canyon and holding a rifle on 4 of Everett's men alone on a mountain. Something had settled in her that hadn't been settled before, not since the road, not since the ledger, not since the church ladies' committee had voted to take her name off the parish rolls. She was not afraid of Everett Hale anymore. She was something else. She wasn't sure it had a word yet. Johua. Silas came back on the 9th day, 2 days earlier than he'd said. Clara heard his horse before she saw him, and she was on the porch before he cleared the tree line, and when he came into the yard and swung down from the saddle, he looked at the scorched pasture fence and the damaged hay storage and the way Martha Voss was sitting on the porch with a shotgun across her knees, and his jaw tightened by degrees. "Tell me," he said. So Clara told him. All of it: Cord's visit, the fire, the swap, the box, the 12 witness statements in Denison Falls. She told it plainly, and in order, the way she told everything. And when she finished, Silas stood in the yard with his arms at his sides and was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at her. Specifically at her. The way he had looked at her at the water barrel that first morning, that reassessing look, but further along than it had been then. "You're all right," he said. Not a question. He was confirming it for himself. "I'm all right," she said. He nodded. Something in his shoulders settled. Denver was... He stopped. Started again. "The Territorial Land Office confirmed my original filing. Competing claim is invalid. I have the certified copy." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document with an official seal. "And the Territorial Marshal's Office accepted a formal complaint. They're sending a deputy to Denison Falls to coordinate with Judge Alderman." Clara stared at him. "A Territorial Marshal's deputy," she said. "Outranks every county official in Holt County," Silas said. "Hale's deputy can't touch this anymore." Clara sat down on the porch step. Not from weakness, from the specific physical weight of something enormous shifting in her direction for the first time. "When?" she said. "Deputy's riding now. Should reach Denison Falls within 4 days." He sat down on the step beside her, close but not crowding. "Judge Alderman has been sent the fraud documentation from Aldridge's brother-in-law. The witness letters should already be in his hands." "Reuben Mercer's statement," Clara said. "The Cooper family, the Brants, Martha's Agricultural Compliance Bureau letter." She turned and looked at Silas. "It's enough. With the Territorial Marshal's Office backing the circuit judge, it's enough to move on." Silas was looking at the satchel on her lap. "You kept it through all of it," he said. "I wasn't going to let it go," she said. He was quiet for a moment. His eyes were on the scorched fence line, but she had the sense he wasn't seeing it. "Cord set that fire," he said, very quietly. "I believe so. He was willing to burn this place down." A pause. "With you in it." "I don't think he intended, Clara." His voice was not raised. It never was. "He set a fire on a canyon ridge above a woman alone and rode down to take advantage of the chaos." He paused again. "He intended." She didn't argue with that. "What comes next," she said, "has to happen in Holt County. The witness families are there. The judge needs to hold court there for the deed transfers to be reversed. Territorial law requires the reversal proceeding to happen in the county where the deeds were filed. She looked at Silas. We have to go back down. He looked at her. She saw the weight of it in his expression. 3 years on this mountain. 3 years of careful distance from the town and the warrant and the story Carver had built around him. And now the thing she was asking required walking back into the middle of all of it with a fraud case and a territorial deputy as the only protection between him and that old arrest order. I know, she said. I know what I'm asking. I know you do, he said. He picked up a small stone from the step, turned it in his hands, set it down. Alderman's court date when... Aldridge's brother-in-law said the request was for 2 weeks from when the documentation arrived. That would be... She counted. 4 days from now. 4 days. Silas set his hands on his knees. He looked at the mountain above them, the high pine ridges, the red stone country he had retreated into and made into something that sustained him, the place he had chosen over the society that had chosen to make him a villain. Then he looked at Clara. She was watching him with the expression she got when she was not trying to persuade, simply waiting, leaving the space open, respecting that a decision this large belonged to the person who would carry the most risk of it. 4 days, he said. Yes. We'd need to leave day after tomorrow to make the timing. Yes. He was quiet for one more moment. Then, Martha Voss, who had been sitting across the porch, apparently occupied with her own thoughts, said without looking up, Boy, the woman rebuilt your entire case file while you were in Denver, survived a canyon fire, and 4 armed men alone on a mountain, and she's sitting here politely letting you think about it. The least you can do is say yes before supper. Silas looked at Martha. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Yes, he said. He said it to Clara. She held his eyes for a moment. What was moving between them was not something either of them would have named out loud in that moment. It was too new and too earned and too fragile, in the way that real things are fragile, not because they are weak, but because they are real. Day after tomorrow, she said. Day after tomorrow, he agreed. Above them, the summer sky was going deep blue and gold at the edges, and the mountain held the last of the heat in the way mountains do, keeping it just long enough to remind you it was there before letting it go. Clara sat on that step with everything she had gathered and everything she intended, and the weight of what was coming in 4 days sitting solid in her chest, and she was not afraid. She was ready. They left before sunrise. Martha Voss stood at the gate with her shotgun and watched them go, and when Clara looked back from the first bend in the trail, Martha raised one hand, not a wave. Exactly more the gesture of a woman who had seen enough of the world to know when something mattered and was acknowledging it without sentiment. Clara raised her hand back, then the trail curved and the ranch was gone. She rode beside Silas in the dark, the horses moving carefully on the descent, and she went over the sequence in her mind, the way she had gone over everything for 3 weeks now. The documentation in her satchel, the witness statements in Denison Falls, the territorial marshal's deputy writing from Denver Judge Alderman and his circuit court. She knew the shape of what had to happen. She knew the order. She had been building toward this since the moment she'd sat down at Everett's desk and understood what she was reading. What she had not accounted for in all the building and planning and documenting was the particular feeling of riding back toward the place that had destroyed her. It wasn't fear. She had already cataloged fear and set it aside. It was something older and quieter than fear. The specific weight of returning to a room where you were humiliated and having to stand in it, again straight-spined, with the full memory of what happened there, sitting in your chest. She had not been back to Holt County in 23 days. It felt longer than that. It felt like a different lifetime. You've gone quiet, Silas said. I'm thinking, Clara said. About the court. About walking back into that town. She paused. I taught their children for 3 years. I organized their harvest suppers and kept their church books and sat with their sick families, and they put me on a wagon without a backward look. She kept her eyes on the trail. I know it was Everett's doing. I know the story he told them, but they chose to believe it fast, Silas. They chose it before they checked a single fact. Silas was quiet for a moment. He rode the way he did everything, with an economy of movement, the horse and the man working as a single considered thing. People choose the story that costs them least, he said. Believing Everett cost them nothing. Believing you cost them a fight with the most powerful man in the county. I know that, she said. I understand the calculation. She stopped, started again. I need to walk in there and stand in front of those people and not let what they chose matter more than what's true. And I'm trying to decide if I can do that. You already did it, he said. She looked at him. That road, he said. 23 days ago. You stepped off that wagon and you started walking. That was the harder thing. He glanced at her, brief and direct. This is just the finish. Clara held that for a moment. Let it settle. You're unexpectedly good at that, she said. At what? Saying the precise thing. He looked ahead at the trail. My mother used to say, economy of words is just respect for the listener, he said. Don't give them more than what's true, and don't give them less. I would have liked your mother, Clara said. She would have liked you, he said. She had no patience for people who weren't useful. It was, Clara understood by now, the highest possible praise. They came into the lower valley country by mid-afternoon, and the quality of the air changed less. Pine, more dust, more heat, sitting flat and heavy without the mountain to break it. The road widened. They began to pass signs of settlement, a fence line, a water trough, a grain shed she recognized from the valley road she'd traveled 3 years ago when she first came to Holt County. She had been so hopeful then. She had a new position, a new town letters of introduction from her Missouri school board. She had thought Holt County was a beginning. She had been right, just not about which beginning. They stopped at a creek crossing to water the horses, and Silas looked at the road ahead. Deputy Marshal's name is Calloway, he said. He's meeting us at the land office in Cedar Crossing, not Holt County. Neutral ground. Alderman's Court is set for Cedar Crossing Courthouse, Clara said. I know. It's better Hale has fewer connections there than in Holt County proper. He has some, Silas said. Don't assume Cedar Crossing is safe. I don't assume anywhere is safe, Clara said. I assume we have documentation and witnesses and a territorial deputy, and that together that's stronger than what Everett has. She looked at him. Is that miscalculation? No, he said. It's accurate. I just want you walking in with your eyes open. My eyes have been open, she said, since the moment I sat down at that desk. He looked at her, nodded once. They crossed the creek and rode on. Cedar Crossing was smaller than Holt County, but better positioned. It sat at the junction of two territorial roads, which made it the natural seat for circuit court proceedings that covered the whole region. The land office was on the main street next to a surveyor's office, and across from the assay bureau, and when Clara and Silas tied their horses at the rail outside, a man was already waiting on the steps. He was younger than Clara had expected, mid-30s, lean with a federal badge, and the particular watchful stillness of someone trained to read situations faster than the situations could unfold. Deputy Marshal Calloway, he said, coming down the steps. He shook Silas's hand and tipped his hat to Clara with the brisk efficiency of a man who treated everyone as equally capable of being useful or dangerous until proven otherwise. Miss Whitaker, I've read the documentation from Denison Falls. He paused. All of it. And, Clara said. And I understand why you didn't come to a county official first, Calloway said. The cooperative structure you've documented, the supply chain, the Agricultural Compliance Bureau, letters, the deed trust. This is more organized than anything I've seen at the county level. This was built to look like 3 separate problems. Took someone with a bookkeeper's eye to see it as one. Clara felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since Denver. Professional acknowledgement. Specific, accurate from someone with the authority to act on it. The witness statements, she said. How many came through? 14 signed statements from Valley families, Calloway said. 3 from mountain ranchers on the supply fraud. And... He reached into his coat. This came in yesterday by fast rider from Denison Falls. He handed her an envelope. She opened it. It was from Tom Briggs. the feed exchange man in Denison Falls, who Aldridge had mentioned, the one connected to the Valley families. He had written 2 pages in a hand that was blunt and direct, and what he said was that he had been present at a meeting of the Holt County Merchant Association in the spring of 1877, where Everett Hale had proposed the cooperative structure, had described it as a consolidation of regional agricultural resources, and had specifically stated that the mountain supply premium was a deliberate price point to encourage valley settlement over altitude claims. Tom Briggs had been in the room. He had heard Everett Hale say it out loud. He had thought at the time that it was aggressive business practice. He had not understood until Clara's letter arrived that it was a coordinated theft mechanism. He would testify. Clara read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in her satchel and looked at Calloway. "He was in the room," she said. "I know," Calloway said. "That's the piece that turns supply fraud into criminal conspiracy." He looked at Silas. "And the Carver warrant, I've reviewed the original filing. It was submitted by R.B. Carver himself, not by any law enforcement entity, and the affidavit was signed by 2 witnesses who were both on Carver's payroll at the time of the incident. That warrant has legal problems significant enough that Judge Alderman has agreed to hold a concurrent hearing." He paused. "Mr. Boone, you may want to be present for that." Silas was very still. "He'll clear it," Silas said. "The evidence strongly suggests so," Calloway said. "The Greer family, both daughters now adults still in the territory, have submitted statements about what happened that night. Their account is substantially different from Carver's." He paused. "Their account matches yours." Something moved across Silas Boone's face that Clara had never seen there before. It was not relief. Exactly. Relief was too simple a word for something that had been carried for 3 years. It was more like the expression of a man who had been holding a heavy thing for so long he had stopped registering its weight, and someone had just put their hand under it to share the load, and the reduction was so sudden he didn't know what to do with his hands. He said nothing for a moment. Then, the Greer daughters. "Both of them," Calloway said. "Ruth and Anna. They've been in Denison Falls since '77. They wanted to testify. They've been waiting for someone to ask." Silas looked at the ground. His jaw was tight, but it was a different kind of tight than Clara had seen before. Not anger or calculation. Something that was working hard not to show how much it mattered. Clara said nothing. She let him have the moment. "Court's at 9 tomorrow morning," Calloway said, giving Silas the space to collect himself. "I'd recommend you both stay at the Crossing Inn tonight. I'll have men outside. Hale knows about the court date. There was no way to keep it quiet once the filings went through, and he'll be there with representation. His lawyers are already in Cedar Crossing." "His lawyers are here," Clara said. "Arrived this morning," Calloway said. 3 of them. From Denver." She absorbed that. 3 lawyers from Denver meant Everett had resources she hadn't fully accounted for, and was prepared to fight the proceeding legally, not just with hired men and intimidation. That was in some ways worse. Hired men you could face on a road. Lawyers in a courtroom could reframe, redirect, delay, and exhaust. "Will Alderman hold?" she said. "Alderman has held for 20 years on this circuit," Calloway said. "He's seen lawyers from Denver before." A pause. "He doesn't particularly like them." The inn was clean and quiet, and Clara sat on the edge of the bed in her room for a long time without doing anything which was unusual for her. She had been moving and building and working for 3 weeks, and now there was nothing left to build. The structure was complete. The pieces were in place, and what happened next would happen in a courtroom where she would have very little control over anything. That was the hardest part. She was a woman who built things. She was not good at waiting for other people to decide whether what she'd built was sufficient. Someone knocked at her door. She opened it. Silas. Hat in his hands. The particular look on his face that she'd learned meant he had something to say and was deciding how to say it. "You eat," he said. "Not yet." "Come down," he said. "There's a table." She came down. They ate in the inn's small dining room with Calloway's men visible through the window, and they didn't talk about the court, or Everett, or the morning. Silas asked her about Missouri, and she told him about the river, and the thick summers, and the schoolroom that had been a converted barn with light coming through the board gaps, and he listened. The way he always listened, with his whole attention missing nothing, making no performance of the listening. She asked him where he'd grown up, and he said Texas south of San Antonio cattle country, and that he'd come to Colorado at 22, because Texas had gotten too crowded with a certain kind of man, and Colorado still had room to find out who you were before other people decided it for you. "Did you find out?" she asked. "Most of it," he said. He looked at his coffee. "Some of it I'm still working on." She looked at him across the table. This man who had come down off a granite rock for a woman he didn't know, because the arithmetic had been simple, and his code had been unequivocal, and she thought about all the things she had lost in the last 3 weeks. Her position, her reputation, her engagement, her sense of the world as a place where working hard and telling the truth were sufficient protection, and she thought about what she had found instead. Not an exchange, not a trade, just the particular truth that sometimes the road that destroys your old life does it because your old life had been built on ground that was never as solid as you thought. "Silas," she said. He looked up. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said, "I want you to know that coming up that mountain was—" She stopped, started again. "I came up because I had nowhere else to go, that was true. But staying working, building this case, all of it, that wasn't desperation. That was choice." She held his eyes. "I want you to know I understand the difference." He looked at her for a long moment. The lamp on the table between them threw soft light across his face, and what she saw there was not the feared ridge devil of Holt County's stories, and it was not the carefully guarded mountain man she'd met on the road, and it was not even quite the man she'd spent 3 weeks working beside. It was something newer and more open than any of those, like a room she hadn't known was there until the door was already open. "I do too," he said. He meant it as more than a response to what she'd said. She understood that. She let it sit between them in the lamplight and didn't try to define it any more precisely than it was ready to be defined. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be long." "I know," she said. "You too." He stood, settled his hat on his head, and paused at the edge of the table. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "You built this case," he said. "Everything in that courtroom tomorrow exists because you held on to what you knew when every person with power told you to let it go." He held her eyes. "Whatever happens, that's already done. That's already real. Nobody can take that back." She held his gaze, felt the weight and the warmth of it in equal measure. "Good night, Silas," she said. "Good night," he said, and left. She sat at the table for a while after, with the lamp and the quiet and the shape of tomorrow in her mind, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, not since before Everett, not since before the Ledger, maybe not since Missouri. She felt like herself. The courthouse in Cedar Crossing was a 2-story building that smelled of old wood and linseed oil, and the specific institutional gravity of a place where things got decided. Clara walked in at 8:50, with Silas on her left, and Calloway on her right, and 14 Valley families filling the benches behind them. And she felt the shift in the room the moment she entered it. She had expected whispers. She had expected the hostile silence of people who had already decided. What she had not expected was Reuben Mercer standing up from the front bench when she came in, turning to face her and removing his hat. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Behind him, James Mercer stood, then the Cooper family, then the Brants. One by one, the families she had written to, the people who had decided that silence was no longer the lesser risk, stood up and turned toward her. Clara stopped walking. She did not cry. She had promised herself she wouldn't, not here, not today. But it was close. Silas put his hand briefly on her shoulder, just a touch, just a moment, and then it was gone, and she breathed and she walked to her seat. At the opposing table, Everett Hale sat with his 3 Denver lawyers. He was dressed immaculately as always. He looked composed. He did not look at Clara when she entered, which she recognized as deliberate, a small managed performance of confidence. She had studied him for 14 months. She knew the difference between his real confidence and his performed confidence. This was the performed kind. He was afraid. Good. Timid. Judge Alderman was 71 years old and had the demeanor of a man who had heard every possible variety of human self-interest and found all of them predictable. He settled into his bench, read the filed documents for 60 seconds in complete silence, and looked up. "We're here on 3 concurrent matters," he said. A fraud complaint against Everett James Hale and associated parties, a deed reversal proceeding for 14 properties in Holt County, and a warrant review for Silas Daniel Boone. He looked at Everett's legal team. Counsel for the respondent. The lead lawyer, Denver expensive suit. The practiced ease of a man who won by exhausting his opponents stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to move to dismiss on grounds that the primary complainant, Miss Clara Whitaker, is herself the subject of a theft charge in Holt County and therefore—" "Sit down," Alderman said. The lawyer sat. "A county-level theft charge filed by the same individual against whom this fraud complaint is directed does not constitute grounds for dismissal," Alderman said. "It constitutes grounds for suspicion. I note it. Continue." Clara kept her face still. Beside her, she felt Silas exhale very slightly. Calloway presented the fraud documentation in sequence: the supply chain, the Red Mesa Trust structure, the fake Agricultural Compliance Bureau, the cooperative letter, the deed transfers. He was methodical and specific, and twice Everett's lead lawyer tried to object and was overruled before he finished the sentence. Then Calloway called Reuben Mercer. Reuben Mercer walked to the front of the room with his hat in his hands and his spine straight, and his voice, when he began to speak, only slightly unsteady. He said what had been done to his family. He said it specifically: the date, the deed number, the man who had come to his door, the document he had signed, the parcel number that no longer appeared in his name in the county register. He said it all the way through without stopping. When he finished, the courtroom was so quiet, Clara could hear the man 2 benches back breathing. Alderman looked at Everett's table. "Response," he said. The lead lawyer said the documents had been signed voluntarily and the deed transfers were legal instruments. Alderman looked at the cooperative letter, at the Agricultural Compliance Bureau letter, at the supply fraud chain. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I'd like to hear from you directly." Everett rose. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Alderman with the pleasant, certain expression Clara knew so well, the one that had told her that day in the bank that the social machinery was on his side, and he knew it. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "I understand there's been some confusion." "There hasn't been any confusion," Alderman said. "There's been a well-organized fraud scheme running for 5 years across my circuit. I've read the documentation. I've read 14 signed witness statements. I've read a letter from a businessman who was present when you described the supply price mechanism as deliberate strategy." He paused. "What I'd like to know is whether you're going to tell me you didn't do it, or whether we're going to save everyone some time." Everett's jaw tightened. A small movement. Clara saw it from 20 feet away. "Your Honor, I'd like to consult with my attorneys." "You've had 3 attorneys for 3 days," Alderman said. "If you need more time to decide whether to tell the truth, that's information in itself." He looked at the room. "We'll take a 15-minute recess." The recess was when it happened. Clara was standing in the corridor outside the courtroom, and Calloway was beside her, and they were talking quietly about the morning sequence when she heard the side door open and footsteps, and looked up. Everett. No lawyers, no cord. Just Everett Hale in his immaculate suit, standing in the corridor, looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not the pleasantness, not the certainty. Something that was underneath the damage control and the calculation, the first genuine thing she'd seen from him in a long time. He was scared. "Clara," he said. Calloway moved forward. Clara put her hand on Calloway's arm. "A minute," she said. Calloway stepped back. His hand was near his firearm, but not on it. Everett looked at Calloway, looked at Clara, came a few steps closer, close enough to speak quietly. This doesn't have to destroy everything, he said. There are ways to— Stop, Clara said. He stopped. I'm going to tell you something, she said. Her voice was absolutely level. And I need you to hear it because I think you're in there trying to calculate whether there's still an arrangement to be made, and I want you to understand there isn't. He was quiet. Those 14 families, she said. Reuben Mercer sat in his kitchen and told me he had 2 daughters and nothing left to lose his name over. The Coopers lost their river access and thought it was their own fault. Martha Voss believed she'd missed a tax notice and blamed herself for 2 years. She held his eyes. You built a machine that made people believe they'd done something wrong when you were the one who wronged them. You built it carefully, and you ran it for 5 years, and you used my name to do it without ever asking me. You made me complicit in something I would have died before choosing. Her voice didn't shake. So no. There's no arrangement. There's no quiet resolution. You go back in that courtroom and you answer what the judge asks you, and whatever comes next, comes next. Everett stared at her. Something in his face, the last performance, the last practiced surface, gave way. What was underneath it was not what she'd expected. It was not a monster. It was a man who had wanted something badly enough to do terrible things for it, and who was now standing in a corridor in Cedar Crossing, watching the structure he'd built start to come apart, and who understood for maybe the first time that there was no face-saving move left. I didn't think it would go this far, he said, very quietly. I know, Clara said. That's the thing about building a scheme on the belief that people won't fight back. Eventually, you find one who will. She walked back to the courtroom. The second half of the proceedings moved faster. Tom Briggs testified via written statement read into the record by Calloway. Every word of the 1877 Merchant Association meeting, Everett's description of the mountain supply premium, the specific language that turned business strategy into documented intent. Everett's lead lawyer objected 4 times, was overruled 4 times. The Cooper family testified. The Brants. 2 more families from the valley whose letters Clara hadn't written. They had come because word had moved through the valley in the way that truth moves when people finally start speaking it. Then Calloway presented the Agricultural Compliance Bureau letter with the Cedar Crossing address. Everett's lawyer asked for another recess. Alderman said no, and then the moment Clara had not expected because she had learned in the last 3 weeks to prepare for everything she could anticipate and hold open space for what she couldn't. Everett's lead lawyer stood and asked to approach the bench. He spoke to Alderman in a low voice for 45 seconds. Alderman looked at him, then at Everett, then at Clara. Mr. Hale will be making a statement, Alderman said. Clara gripped the edge of the table. Beside her, she heard Silas go very still. Everett stood. His lawyers were around him like scaffolding around a structure that had started to lean. He looked at Alderman. The deed transfers were conducted through instruments I controlled, he said. His voice was still controlled, but the pleasantness was entirely gone. What was left was just the words stripped of performance. The Agricultural Compliance Bureau letters were generated through the cooperative. The supply pricing through Dunmore Brothers was set at a deliberate premium above fair market rate. He paused. The signatures attributed to Miss Whitaker were not made by her. The courtroom erupted. Alderman's gavel came down twice. Clara sat in the noise and the gavel and the sudden movement of 14 families behind her, who had been told for years that what happened to them was their own fault. And she felt the specific sensation of a structure she had been holding up for 3 weeks with her memory and her notes and her letters and her absolute refusal to let go of what she knew was true, finally being held up by something larger than herself. She felt Silas's hand find her wrist under the table. Just for a second. Steady and certain, and there. She put her hand over his and held on. What followed took 2 more hours, which was fast for territorial court proceedings of that magnitude. Calloway knew his business. Alderman knew the law. The warrants went out before noon. Everett Hale R.B. Carver, 3 cooperative officers and Cord, whose full name was Cordell Marsh, who had made the mistake of setting a fire on a mountain and leaving 4 witnesses. The deed reversals were ordered. All 14. The process would take weeks of administrative work, but the legal order existed, and it was filed, and it was binding, and no one in Holt County or Cedar Crossing or anywhere in that circuit was going to be able to undo it. The county theft charge against Clara Whitaker was dismissed as retaliatory and without merit. Alderman said those exact words without merit into the record, and Clara wrote them in her memory beside the capital C in the forged signature and the names of 12 families and everything else she had held on to for 23 days. The warrant review for Silas Boone took 20 minutes. Ruth and Anna Greer, both women, both in their 20s, both with the specific composed courage of people who had waited a long time to speak, gave testimony that corroborated every element of Silas's account of the night at the Greer homestead. The warrant was voided. The record was amended. Silas sat in the courtroom while Alderman read the amended record into the proceedings, and he did not move and did not speak. And Clara sat beside him and watched his face and saw the thing she had seen in the corridor outside the inn the night before that window opening in him. That room she hadn't known was there, open a little wider. When it was done, Alderman looked at Silas directly over the top of his glasses. "Mr. Boone," he said, "the record should have read this way 3 years ago. I'm sorry it didn't." Silas nodded, one short, definitive nod. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said. Outside the courthouse, Reuben Mercer shook Clara's hand with both of his and couldn't speak for a moment, which was all right because she couldn't either. Martha, who had ridden down from the mountain that morning in time for the proceedings, because of course she had hugged Clara once hard, and then stepped back and said, "Told you," as if the outcome had never been in question, which was possibly the most comfort anyone had offered her in 3 weeks. Pete Aldridge shook Silas's hand for a long time, and whatever passed between the 2 men in that handshake didn't need words and didn't use them. Then the crowd moved and settled and began the particular business of aftermath. And Clara and Silas ended up on the courthouse steps in the afternoon sun, slightly apart from the rest of it, and stood in the quiet that follows the thing you've been driving toward for long enough that its arrival feels almost too large to hold. "It's done," Clara said. "The legal part," Silas said. "Families still have to get their deeds reinstated. That'll take time." "I know. I'll help." She looked at him. "I was thinking Cedar Crossing has no school teacher. The county seat should have a school and a land office where settlers can have contracts reviewed before they sign them." She paused. "I'm good at both those things." Silas looked at her. There was something in his expression that she recognized from the very beginning, that rapid, thorough inventory, but what he was inventorying had changed entirely. "Cedar Crossing's a long way from Holt County," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." "It's a 2-hour ride from my ranch," he said. "I know," she said. "I measured it on your maps." He looked at her for a long, steady moment. "You measured it," he said. "I'm a practical woman," she said. "Your mother would have approved." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. The full version this time, real and unhurried and entirely his. "She would have," he said. He looked out at Cedar Crossing's main street at the families moving through it at the particular late afternoon light of a July day in Colorado that turned everything gold and long-shadowed. "I'll need to fix that fence line before winter. Hay storage, too." "I'll help," she said. "You don't have to." "I know that," Clara said. "That's not why I'm offering." He looked at her. She looked back. Everything that had been building between them since that first morning at the water barrel through the ledger work, and the fire and the ride and the courtroom, sat between them, present and real and patient, the way things that are earned tend to be. Not rushing to be named, not asking for more than it was ready to carry. Just there, solid and warm and chosen. "Come back up the mountain," he said. "When you're ready." "I'll need a few days," she said. "There's paperwork, the school petition, the land office application." "I'll wait," he said. She nodded. She turned and looked at Cedar Crossing at the town she was about to ask to give her a start. and she felt the specific knowledge of someone who has walked through a fire and come out the other side, understanding what they're made of. She had told the truth. She had been destroyed for it. She had refused to stay destroyed. And now she was standing in the sun, with a future she had built out of nothing but what she remembered and what she refused to let go. And the man who had come down off a rock for her was going to wait on a mountain until she was ready, because that was who he was, and she was beginning to understand that some things once known cannot be unknown. Whatever came next, she was ready for it. She had been ready, she realized, since she pressed her bleeding palm flat against a burning road and got back on her feet. The paperwork took 4 days. Clara had known it would take at least 3, and she had given herself the extra day as a buffer because she was a practical woman, and practical women accounted for the gap between what should happen and what actually did. She filed the school petition with the Cedar Crossing County Clerk on the first morning, the land office application on the second, and spent the 3rd and 4th days in the courthouse helping Calloway's office process the administrative side of the deed reversals, because the legal order existed, but the order had to be translated into 14 separate county register corrections, and that work required someone with a precise eye and the patience to do it without error. Clara had both. She worked at a table in the back of Calloway's temporary office, cross-referencing the original deed filings against the Red Mesa transfer records, checking parcel numbers, flagging discrepancies, writing up correction notices in the clean, specific language that would hold up if anyone ever challenged the reversal. It was not glamorous work. It was the kind of work that kept her from thinking too hard about Holt County, where Everett's arrest had apparently caused the sort of social earthquake that shook loose everything people had been holding in polite suspension for years, and where the story of Clara Whitaker had been violently reversed in the town's collective telling. She had heard through Calloway being described as brave. She had complicated feelings about that. On the 3rd evening, James Mercer came to find her at the courthouse. He knocked on the open door and stood in the frame with his hat in his hands, and Clara looked up from the deed correction she was writing and said, "James, is your father all right?" "Yes, ma'am." "He came in a few steps. He wanted me to bring you something." He held out an envelope. "He said you'd know what it is." She opened it. Inside was the deed to the Mercer property. Not a copy, not a courthouse notice. The actual original deed, which Reuben Mercer had apparently been holding since the Red Mesa reversal order, came through waiting for this specific moment to send it to this specific person. On the back of the deed in Reuben's handwriting, he had written, "Because of you, my daughters will inherit what's theirs." Clara set the deed on the table very carefully. She looked at it for a moment. "Tell your father," she said, "that I'm going to frame this and hang it in the land office when it opens, so that people coming in to have their contracts reviewed can see what the work is for." James Mercer looked at her. His face did the thing young men's faces do when they are unexpectedly moved by something and are trying to decide whether that's acceptable. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He put his hat back on. "My father also says he says the school's going to need students and that the Mercer family will be first in line." Clara felt the tightness in her throat that she had been managing since the courtroom, since Reuben's handshake, since Martha's hug, since all the moments that kept arriving and refusing to be small. "Good," she said. "Tell him I'll hold him to it." James left. Clara sat alone in Calloway's office with the Mercer deed on the table, and the weight of 4 days settling into something that felt less like exhaustion and more like completion. And she thought about the shape of what came next. Cedar Crossing. A school. A land office. A 2-hour ride from a ranch on a high ridge where a man with a strict moral code and an economy of words was waiting for her to be ready. She was ready. She gathered the deed and her papers and her coat, and she went to find a horse. She arrived at the ranch at midday, and Silas was on the roof of the barn. He came down the moment he heard her horse, not hurrying exactly, but moving with the focused efficiency of someone who had been doing something and had decided to stop doing it. And when he reached the ground and she swung down from the saddle, he looked at her for a long moment with those level eyes that she had learned to read through the full dictionary of their meanings. 4 days, he said. I said I'd need a few days, she said. 4 is a few. It is, he agreed. He took her horse's reins without asking, and led the animal to the trough, and Clara stood in the yard of the ranch that she had left 9 days ago under fire and threat, and the specific pressure of knowing that everything she'd built could still collapse, and looked at it differently now. The cabin, the barn, the garden along the south wall, the mountains above holding the last of the summer heat at the top of the pines. It looked like something that had been waiting. "How's the fence?" she asked. "Fixed," he said. "Hay storage is rebuilt. Lost about 1/3 of what I'd put up for winter, but there's time for another cut if the weather holds." "I'll help with the second cut," she said. He looked at her over the horse's back. Something in his expression was open in the way she'd seen it open in the corridor of the Cedar Crossing Inn and on the courthouse steps, wider than it had been even then. "You're staying," he said. "I'm going to Cedar Crossing most days," she said. "The school won't run itself, and the land office needs to be established before the next season's settlers come through. But—" she paused. "Yes, I'm staying." He finished with the horse. He came around to her side of the trough and stood close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes earned from years of reading ridges and weather and distances. "Clara," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. Not with the inventory look, not with the assessment look. The newer one. The one that had no name yet and didn't need one. "I'd like to ask you something," he said. "Ask?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. This was not hesitation. She knew his silences well enough by now to know the difference between the ones that were working and the ones that were withholding. This one was working. "I've been on this mountain 3 years, he said. "Longer than that, I've been a man people decide things about before they shake my hand. What I am, what I did, what I'm worth other people's stories about that." He paused. "You came up here knowing every version of that story, the bad ones, and the ones that turned out to be lies." He looked at her steadily. "And you made up your own mind." "I did," she said. "I'd like to know," he said. "When you look at this, the ranch, the mountain, the kind of life that's up here, is this something you're choosing because it's what you have? Or is it something you're choosing because it's what you want?" Clara stood in the yard of that mountain ranch in the last good heat of a Colorado summer, and understood that this was the real question, the one underneath all the other questions, the one that had been building since a granite outcrop above a dusty road, and that it deserved the same thing she had given everything else in the last month. The precise truth. "When I was in Cedar Crossing doing the deed corrections," she said, "Callaway offered me a position, full-time records management for the Territorial Marshal's office. Good salary, permanent appointment, Cedar Crossing address." She watched his face. "I told him I'd think about it." Silas waited. "I thought about it for about 4 minutes," she said. "Then I told him no. And when I was explaining why I said—" She stopped, took a breath. "I said I had somewhere I was going. Not because it was the only option, because it was the right one." She held his eyes. "I want this, Silas. The work, the mountain, the life. And I want it with you specifically." She paused. "Is that clear enough?" He looked at her for one long, unhurried moment. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "Now tell me what else needs doing before winter, because I've been sitting in a courthouse for 4 days, and I need to use my hands." The corner of his mouth moved, the full version. The one she'd been watching develop since that first morning at the water barrel, each iteration a little more unguarded than the last. "Come inside," he said. "I'll show you the supply list." 2 weeks later, the Cedar Crossing School opened. It occupied a room in the back of the county clerk's building, which was not ideal, but was adequate, and Clara had cleaned it, arranged the borrowed desks, nailed up a map of the territories, and written Cedar Crossing School on the door in her best hand. The land office application was still processing territorial approvals, moved at their own rhythm, but the school had been approved in 6 days, because there were 11 children in Cedar Crossing without a teacher, and the county clerk had signed the petition with visible relief. On the first morning, she had 9 students. By the end of the week, she had 14. She rode to the ranch most evenings. On the mornings she taught, she rose before dawn to make the 2-hour ride to Cedar Crossing and back in the same day's light, and Silas would have the fire already up and the coffee on when she came in, because he paid attention and he remembered. And she was discovering a man who expressed care through action rather than speech, a language she was becoming fluent in. They worked. They talked. They built the habit of each other the way you build anything that's meant to last carefully, deliberately, one honest day at a time. On the 3rd week, Pete Aldridge rode down from the mountain with 2 neighbors, both mountain ranchers, who had been overcharged by Dunmore Brothers and had signed statements for the territorial case. They came to ask Clara if she'd be willing to review their supply contracts going forward, now that Dunmore Brothers had been dissolved as part of the fraud proceedings, and a new supplier was coming up from the south. They wanted someone with a careful eye to look at the terms before they signed. Clara sat at Silas's writing table and read 3 contracts in an hour and marked every clause that needed renegotiation. When she handed them back, Pete Aldridge looked at the annotations and then at Clara and said, "Miss Whitaker, you know the territorial bar doesn't require a law degree for land and contract work, just a certification from the examining committee in Denver." Clara looked at him. "I know that," she said. "Calloway would sign your application," Aldridge said. "So would Judge Alderman, and I'd guess a few dozen families in this county." Clara sat with that for a moment. "I'll write to Denver," she said. Aldridge nodded like the matter was settled, which it essentially was. After the men left, Silas looked at her from across the room with that open, steady expression. "Land agent and schoolteacher," he said. "And bookkeeper," she said. "Can't forget bookkeeper." "Lot of work," he said. "Good," she said. "I told you. That's how I'm built." He looked at her. Something in his eyes was warm and unhurried and entirely without reservation, and she held it the way she held things that were true completely, without flinching, without looking for the place where it would run out. Then, on a Thursday morning in late August, Holt County came to Cedar Crossing. Clara was at the school finishing the morning's arithmetic lesson when she heard the horses and looked through the window and saw a group of riders she didn't immediately recognize. She told her students to work on their copy exercises, and she stepped outside. There were 6 of them. And walking at the front on foot, leading the group with her church hat on, despite the heat, was Vera Hollis, wife of Deacon Hollis, who had stood on Clara's doorstep and told her to leave Holt County, and who had sat on the church ladies' committee that removed Clara's name from the parish rolls. Clara stood on the schoolhouse step and waited. Vera Hollis stopped at the foot of the step and looked up at Clara. She was a tall woman with a face that had been handsome and was now austere, and she had the bearing of someone who was accustomed to being right and was not comfortable with what she had come to say. "Miss Whitaker," she said. "Mrs. Hollis," Clara said. Behind Vera, the 6 riders, Clara recognized 2 of them as families from Holt County. Parents of former students shifted in their saddles with the collective energy of people who had rehearsed this moment and were not certain the rehearsal was adequate. "We've come from Holt County," Vera said. "The committee asked me to speak." "The Church Ladies' Committee," Clara said. "Yes." Vera's jaw tightened. "We understand that the charges against you were—" She stopped, breathed. "We understand that the situation was not as it was presented to us." "That's accurate," Clara said. Vera looked at her. Clara did not make it easier. She had decided when she woke that morning that she was done making things easier for people whose convenience had cost her everything. "We were wrong," Vera said. 3 words, and they came out like something being set down that had been heavy for a while. "We should have asked more questions before we—" Another stop. "We should have asked questions at all. We didn't. And what happened to you because of that?" She looked at the school sign on the door. It wasn't right. Clara was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "It wasn't. We'd like—" Vera straightened. "The committee would like to offer a formal apology, in writing if you'll accept it." One of the riders behind Vera reached into his coat and produced an envelope. He came forward and held it out. Clara took it. She didn't open it. "Mrs. Hollis," she said, "I appreciate you making the ride. That took something." She paused. "And I'll accept the apology, but I want to say something, and I need you to carry it back to Holt County with you." Vera nodded. "What happened to me?" Clara said, "Happened because a community chose to believe a powerful man over a woman they'd worked beside for 3 years without checking a single fact. Everett Hale told a story that was convenient, and you all accepted it because questioning it would have been uncomfortable." She kept her voice even. "I don't tell you that to punish you. I tell you because the families who lost their land, the Mercers, the Coopers, the Brants, and the others, they were failed by the same thing. Not by one corrupt man alone. By a community that chose comfort over truth." She paused. "If Holt County wants to do better by its people, that's the thing to examine. Not the apology to me. The habit that made it necessary." Vera stood on the step below her and said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "You're right." "I know," Clara said, not unkindly. "Accurately." Vera looked at the school door again. "They say you're opening a land office." "I've applied for the certification," Clara said. "It should come through in the fall." "Holt County doesn't have one," Vera said. "Settlers come in and sign what they're handed and find out later what they signed." "I know," Clara said. "It was part of how the scheme worked." Vera was quiet for another moment. Then, "If you ever chose to serve Holt County families through your office, we wouldn't be ungrateful." Clara looked at her steadily. "I'll serve anyone in this territory who needs contract review," she said, "including Holt County. Not because you've asked me to, because it's what the work is for." Vera Hollis put her hand out. Clara shook it. The riders from Holt County turned back down the road, and Clara stood on the schoolhouse step and watched them go, and felt the particular sensation of a wound that had been cleaned, not healed yet, that would take longer but cleaned, which was the necessary first step. She went back inside to her students. The twist came from the one direction Clara hadn't fully covered. It was Calloway who brought it riding up to the ranch on a Tuesday afternoon when Clara happened to be there, reviewing the supply contract revisions she'd promised to Aldridge's neighbors. Silas came in from the pasture when he heard the federal horse, and both of them stood on the porch when Calloway dismounted. He looked serious in a specific way, not emergency serious but significant serious. The face of a man with information that changes the shape of a thing already thought resolved. "There's been a development," he said, "from Denver." "Sit down," Silas said. They all sat. The Territorial Marshal's office completed their review of the Red Mesa Land Trust holdings, Calloway said. "The full asset audit." He paused. "The trust holds 43 properties, not 14, 43. Clara went still. "The 14 we knew about were the Holt County deeds," Calloway said. "But the trust was running the same scheme in 2 other counties under different company names. Cedar Branch Holdings in Fremont County, Mountain Meridian Group up in Lake County." He looked at Clara. "Same structure, same method, fake Compliance Bureau letters, supply chain overcharging deed transfers. Different names, same fingerprints. 43 families, 29 more than she'd known." "Carver," Silas said. "Carver's network ran all 3, Calloway confirmed. Hale controlled Holt County. Carver managed the broader territory. Between them, they'd been running this across 3 counties for 7 years. He paused. "The Territorial Marshal is treating it as a coordinated criminal conspiracy at the territorial level. Not just a county fraud case." "The other families," Clara said, "in Fremont and Lake counties. Do they know? Have they been notified?" "That's why I'm here," Calloway said. He looked at her directly. "The Marshal's office needs someone to do what you did in Holt County. Go through the deed records, identify the affected families, document the individual cases in a form the territorial court can use." He paused. "We have lawyers who can handle the legal proceedings. We don't have anyone with your specific combination of skills, the bookkeeping, the records work, the ability to explain what happened to families in language they can understand, and then turn that into courtroom documentation. He set his hands on the table. The marshal's office is asking if you'd be willing to consult on both county cases. It would mean travel. Fremont County is 3 days south. Lake County is 4 days north. Clara looked at the papers on the table, then at Silas. Silas looked at her with his steady, level eyes. He said nothing. He was very specifically not leaning her toward any answer, which was itself a kind of answer, the answer of a man who understood that her work was her own and her choice was her own, and that what he wanted for her was whatever she actually chose. She felt that all the way through. "How long would the Fremont County work take?" she said. 3 to 4 weeks on site, Calloway said. Lake County the same. We'd want to begin Fremont within the month before the fall session. I'd need to arrange coverage for the school, Clara said. There's a woman in Cedar Crossing, Margaret Bell, she taught in Kansas before her husband's work brought her out here. I've been thinking she'd make a good assistant. Calloway waited. And the land office application will need to be expedited, Clara said. If I'm going to be doing this work officially, I need the certification in hand, not pending. Aldermen can file a priority request with the examining committee, Calloway said. Given the nature of the work. Then yes, Clara said. I'll do it. Calloway nodded. He stood, shook both their hands, and rode back toward Cedar Crossing. In the quiet after he left, Clara sat with the new shape of the thing. 43 families, 2 more counties, a scheme that was larger than she'd known, which meant the need was larger than she'd known, which meant the work was larger than she'd known. She was not afraid of that. She was something closer to the opposite. Silas sat across from her with his coffee going cold in his hands. You're going to be gone 2 months, he said. Probably more, she said. If there are other cases they find in the audit, there will be, he said. There always are. She looked at him. Are you asking me not to go? No, he said, immediately, clearly, without qualification. I'm counting weeks. She felt something move in her chest that was not the work feeling, not the justice feeling. The other one. The one she had been living alongside for weeks now, without naming it because naming it felt like rushing something that deserved to arrive in its own time. Silas, she said. I know, he said. No, she said. I need to say it. He looked at her. I love you, she said. That's not... She stopped, started over because she believed in accuracy, and this deserved it. That's not something I say lightly, and it's not something I'm saying because the moment is sentimental. It's something I've known for a while, and I think you should know it before I ride to Fremont County. She held his eyes. Because you came down off a rock for a woman you didn't know, and you put her at your writing table, and you handed her a pencil, and you let her be useful, and that is... Her voice was steady. It stayed steady. That is the specific thing I didn't know I needed until you did it. And it's the reason I'm still standing. Partly. Silas set his coffee cup down. He looked at her for a long moment, the full inventory, all the way through, nothing withheld. Then he reached across the table and took her hand in both of his. His hands were large and work-roughened and absolutely certain. I love you, he said. I've known it since you told me you'd measured the distance to Cedar Crossing on my maps. The corner of his mouth moved. Practical woman. Clara laughed. It surprised her it came out genuine and unguarded, and she didn't try to manage it. Your mother's word, she said. Highest compliment I know, he said. He held her hand, and she held his, and they sat in the cabin where she had first read his ledger, and found the thread that unraveled Everett Hale's network. And the summer was going gold outside, and the mountains held it all in the patient, enduring way that mountains hold things. Clara left for Fremont County 3 weeks later. She had arranged the school coverage, filed the expedited certification request, completed the first round of Holt County deed corrections, and written a 2-page procedural guide for Calloway's office on how to approach deed fraud documentation in the other counties, because she was going to do the work herself. But she also wanted the method to exist independently of her documented, clearly enough that the next person could use it. She was a teacher. She knew that the point was never just to do the thing. The point was to show how. Silas rode with her to the edge of the ranch property. At the boundary line, where the trail split toward Cedar Crossing, and he would stop and she would continue. He pulled up alongside her, and they sat on their horses in the early morning. "Write me," he said. "I will," she said. "The school correspondence goes through Aldridge's brother-in-law. Same route." "I'll fix the roof on the east side of the barn while you're gone," he said. "There's a soft spot in the corner that won't survive a hard snow." "When I'm back," she said, "I'd like to learn to do that myself." He looked at her. "Roofing," she clarified. "All right," he said. "And I want to learn to read the weather the way you do," she said. "You looked at the sky the morning before the fire, and I could see you knew something was coming. I want to understand how that works." "It takes time," he said. "I have time," she said. "We have time." He held her gaze. There was everything in it, the 3 weeks of morning coffee and water hauls and ledger work, the fire and the courtroom and the lamplit table at the Cedar Crossing Inn, the hand on her wrist during Everett's confession, the words across a table that had arrived unhurried and meant every syllable. "You do," he said. "Come back." "I'll come back," she said. She rode south. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew exactly where he was standing at the boundary line of his ranch, with his hat brim against the sun, watching her until the trail curved and the pines closed around it. She carried that with her down the mountain. She came back 6 weeks later, which was 2 weeks earlier than she'd expected, because she was efficient and the Fremont County records were better organized than Holt County's, and because if she was truthful with herself, she had pushed hard on the work every day with the specific motivation of a woman who has somewhere particular she wants to be. 29 more families. 29 sets of documents filed with the territorial marshal. 29 correction notices ready for the courts. She had sat at tables in Fremont County kitchens and listened to people describe the day someone came to their door with official-looking papers, and she had written it all down and turned it into the form the law required. And she had watched again and again the expression on people's faces when they understood that what had been taken from them could actually be returned. She rode up the mountain in the last light of a September afternoon, the summer finally giving way at the edges, the pines beginning to turn. Silas was at the gate when she came through the tree line. He had not been watching the trail, he was carrying a water bucket from the direction of the creek, and when he heard her horse, he stopped and set the bucket down and looked at her. She swung down from the saddle. They stood in the yard of the ranch at the end of the summer that had changed everything, and he looked at her the way she'd looked at the mountains when she first arrived, taking the full measure of something he intended to keep, and she stood steady under it, the way she stood under everything now. "Early," he said. "I work fast," she said. He picked up her saddlebag. He led her horse to the trough. He held the cabin door for her without comment, the same way he had done every day she'd spent on this mountain, as if the gesture were simply the right response to the situation and required no drama. She walked into the cabin. It was exactly as she'd left it. The books on the shelf, the maps on the wall, the writing table with the pencil box, her annotated copy of the Holt County deed records still in the corner where she'd left it 6 weeks ago. She sat down at the table and let out a long breath. Silas set her bag down and built up the fire and filled the coffee pot, and she watched him move through the cabin that had become, without either of them announcing it, as much hers as his. And she thought about everything that had brought her to this room. A ledger. She shouldn't have read a road. She'd been left on a rock, above a mountain pass, where a man had done the arithmetic and come down on the right side of it. "Lake County," she said. "Callaway says they want to start in October." "How long?" he said. 5-6 weeks. She paused. "I told him I'd need a week here first." He poured the coffee and set it in front of her. "1 week isn't enough," he said. "No," she said. "It isn't. But it's what I told him." He sat across from her. He looked at her with the open, unhurried expression she had learned to hold without looking away. "Marry me," he said. Clara looked at him. He did not elaborate. He had said it the way he said everything that mattered directly without performance, meaning every word and no more words than were necessary. She thought about 14 months with Everett Hale, the ring that had belonged to his grandmother, the April porch, the man who had turned out to be a careful stranger. She thought about a mountain morning and a water bucket and a pencil placed in front of her without being asked to. "Yes," she said, immediately, clearly, without qualification. He reached across the table. She met him halfway. His hand was warm and certain, and she held it and thought, this is what it is supposed to feel like. Not the performance of safety, but the actual thing. Two people who had both been taken apart by other people's choices, and had both separately and then together built something the world could not unmake. "Before Lake County," he said. "Yes," she said, "before Lake County." Outside, the first real coolness of the season was moving through the pines the summer, releasing its hold on the high country. The way summers eventually do, not all at once, but in the way that things which have been giving everything give out at the edges first, and then the center, and then you realize the change has already happened and you are standing in something new. Clara Whitaker sat in the cabin on the mountain with her future husband's hand in hers, and thought about the woman who had pressed a bleeding palm flat against a burning road and refused to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her break. She thought about what that woman had carried down the mountain a month later. Not the satchel, not the ledger, not the tin box, with the documentation that brought down Everett Hale's network across 3 counties. What she had carried was herself. Intact, precise, undiminished by everything they had tried to reduce her to. And now she sat on the other side of it with the work she had built, and the life she had chosen, and the man who had seen her clearly from the very first moment, and decided that was enough reason to come down off a rock. She had lost a reputation, she had found a life, and she had built it herself from nothing but truth and will, and the refusal to stay down. That was not luck, that was not rescue. That was who Clara Whitaker was, and the world was going to know it for a very long time.